Hey there, story lovers. This is Supreme Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Madame Pomfrey's emergency scan during first year found 67 memory charms and Dumbledore's 52-year breeding program exposed? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The scan. Madame Pomfrey had performed 10,000 diagnostic spells in her 31 years as Hogwarts matron. She knew what a fiend-fire burn looked like on a magical core scan. She knew the particular shimmer of a cruciatus residue, the grey fog of a badly brewed sleeping draught overdose, the sharp red spikes of basilisk venom exposure. She had seen children come through her doors with curses embedded in their spines, with hexes eating through their nervous systems, with magical feedback so severe their cores looked like cracked mirrors. She had never seen anything like this. The boy lay unconscious in the bed closest to her office, bed 1, the bed she always kept nearest her supplies for the worst cases. Harry Potter, 11 years old, 63 pounds if he was generous about it, with a face that was far too thin and a scar on his forehead that had been weeping a faint golden light ever since they'd carried him down from the third-floor corridor 4 hours ago. Professor Quirrell was dead. The defense teacher had crumbled to ash when the boy had touched him, which was its own category of alarming, but that was a problem for the headmaster. The golden light from the scar had been what prompted her to run the deep scan. Standard diagnostic charms showed nothing more than magical exhaustion and mild malnutrition, the malnutrition she'd flagged in September and been quietly told by Dumbledore to note but not escalate, a directive that had already been sitting uncomfortably in her stomach for 8 months. But the golden light wasn't normal. The golden light suggested something was happening at a deeper level than surface diagnostics could reach. So she'd used the Revelio Profundus. A full-spectrum diagnostic. The kind that mapped a witch or wizard's magical core, their memory architecture, their charm residue, their bloodline markers, everything. She used it perhaps twice a year, on cases that genuinely warranted it. It took 40 minutes to complete and left a physical scroll of parchment that unrolled to nearly 6 feet. Harry Potter's scroll had unrolled to 14 feet and was still going. She'd caught it before it hit the floor, standing there in the blue light of the diagnostic spell with her hands shaking in a way they hadn't shaken since her first year on the job. She'd read it once. Then she'd read it again. Then she'd sat down on the stool beside bed 1 and looked at the unconscious boy for a long moment, at his too thin face and his two big glasses folded on the nightstand and the scar that had finally stopped glowing. Then she'd walked to her fireplace, put in a handful of flu powder with a grip that could have cracked the jar, and said, "Minerva McGonagall's office. Now. Emergency." McGonagall had come through in under 2 minutes, still in her tartan dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way Pomfrey had only ever seen twice before in 3 decades. One of those times had been the night the Potters died. "What's happened?" McGonagall's eyes went immediately to Harry's bed. He's stable. Sit down, Minerva." "I don't need to, sit down." McGonagall sat. That, more than anything, told her how serious Pomfrey's face must look. Pomfrey handed her the scroll without a word and watched her read it. She watched the moment McGonagall's eyes found the relevant section. She knew exactly where it was, she'd already marked it with a trembling underlining charm. She watched the color drain out of Minerva McGonagall's face with the slow inevitability of water emptying from a bath. "This is," McGonagall stopped. "Yes. Poppy, this says, I know what it says. 67. McGonagall's voice had gone very flat. The voice she used when she was controlling something enormous. 67 memory charms. The oldest ones date to when he was 14 months old. The most recent, Pomfrey pointed, and her finger was steady now, steadier than it had been an hour ago, because she had made a decision somewhere between sitting on that stool and calling for Minerva, and decisions made her steady. The most recent was applied 11 days before he arrived at Hogwarts. September 1st. McGonagall looked up from the scroll. Her eyes were doing something Pomfrey had never seen in them before, they were lost. Minerva McGonagall's eyes were never lost. Who could have? She stopped again. Started again. Who would have access to this child consistently enough, across 10 years? Don't, Pomfrey said quietly. I'm not suggesting, Minerva. Don't work around it. Just say it. The fire crackled between them. In bed 1, Harry Potter breathed slowly, in and out, his chest rising and falling with the uncomplicated depth of magical exhaustion. His face in sleep looked even younger than 11. He looked like the child he was, and Pomfrey had to look away from him to keep her voice even. McGonagall set the scroll down on her knees with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something fragile. There are only 3 or 4 wizards alive who could have applied memory charms at this level of precision. Layered to this degree. Calibrated this finely to a child's developing magical architecture. She paused. That would require someone who understood exactly how a child's memory and core were growing. Who could monitor the development and adjust the charms accordingly. Yes. It would require ongoing access. Yes. It would require. McGonagall stopped a 3rd time, and this time the stop was final. She looked at the fire. It would require Albus. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Pomfrey nodded once. I've already decided that I'm reporting this to the DMLE in the morning. I wanted you to know first. As his head of house. A beat. And because I thought you deserved to see it before anyone else did. McGonagall was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the fire settled and popped and sent a small cascade of sparks up the chimney. Then she said, he'll have an explanation. I'm sure he will. Albus always has an explanation. I know. That doesn't mean. McGonagall picked up the scroll again, looked at it, set it down. That doesn't mean this is what it looks like. Pomfrey met her eyes steadily. 67 memory charms on an 11-year-old boy. Applied systematically over a decade by someone with precise, expert knowledge of his magical development. Minerva. What else could it look like? McGonagall had no answer for that. She sat in the chair beside Harry's bed until nearly 3 in the morning, and Pomfrey didn't ask her to leave. Harry woke up at 7:15 with the particular disorientation of someone who had been unconscious for a very different reason than sleep. He came up from it too fast and grabbed the edge of the mattress before he'd even fully processed where he was, and the first thing he registered was the smell, antiseptic and dried herbs and something faintly sweet, and then the white ceiling, and then the fact that his glasses were already being pressed into his hand. He put them on. Madame Pomfrey was standing at the foot of his bed with a clipboard and an expression he couldn't read. Professor McGonagall was sitting in a chair to his left, still in her dressing gown but with her hair pinned up now, and she looked like she hadn't slept. Good morning, Mr. Potter, Pomfrey said. How do you feel? Harry took stock. His head hurt with a deep, round ache that sat somewhere behind his eyes. His chest felt hollow, the way it sometimes did after he'd done accidental magic as a kid and the Dursleys had. He stopped that thought and filed it away in the place he kept things he didn't look at directly. Okay, he said. Tired. That's expected. Your magical core was severely taxed. She made a note on her clipboard with the slightly aggressive precision she used when she was thinking about something else. Mr. Potter, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be honest with me even if the answers seem strange. Harry looked at her. Then at McGonagall. McGonagall met his eyes and then looked at her own hands, which was the most alarming thing that had happened since he'd woken up. Okay, he said slowly. Do you frequently experience gaps in your memory? Moments where you expected to remember something and found you couldn't? Everyone forgets things. I'm not asking about everyone. I'm asking about you specifically. Moments where it felt like there should be something there and there wasn't. Harry thought about that. The honest answer was yes, but the honest answer had always seemed like something that happened to him specifically and not to normal people, so he'd filed it in the same place he filed the other things. Yeah, he said. Sometimes. Like he searched for words and found the ones that had always fit best. Like there's a hole. Where something should be. Pomfrey wrote something down and her pen moved faster than the question warranted. Do you ever have strange dreams? Ones that feel like memories but don't match anything you actually remember experiencing? Yes. That one came out fast, without the pause. Dreams of green light. Dreams of a woman's voice that he couldn't quite make sound like anything recognizable. Dreams of warmth and then cold and then a house falling in around him, which he'd always put down to his imagination filling in the gaps of what he'd been told. Yeah. Often, actually. McGonagall made a soft sound that she immediately controlled, and Harry looked at her sharply. Professor? It's nothing, Potter. Her voice was completely level. The leveling was too complete. It's not nothing. You look like someone told you something terrible. He said it simply, because it was true, and he'd learned years ago that dancing around true things just made them worse. The Dursleys had proven that particular lesson thoroughly. What's going on? Pomfrey set her clipboard down. She pulled up a chair and sat across from him, which she had never done before in any of his previous visits to the hospital wing. She always stood, always kept the professional distance. The sitting down did something to his stomach. Mr. Potter. When I ran your diagnostic scan last night, I found something that I am obligated, both medically and legally, to report to the ministry. She kept her voice even and her eyes on his. And before I do that, I felt you had the right to know what I found. You're 11 years old and that means certain legal decisions sit with your guardians and with this school, but, something in her face shifted, this concerns you more than it concerns anyone else. And you struck me, in September, as a young man who is more capable of handling hard truths than most adults give him credit for. Harry said nothing. He watched her face. During your scan, I identified 67 separate memory charm residues in your magical architecture. She said it cleanly, without softening it. Memory charms that were applied to you at various points over the last 10 years. The earliest ones date to when you were 14 months old. The hospital wing was very quiet. Somewhere outside the tall windows, a bird was doing something determined in the castle gutters. Harry looked at the white ceiling. Then at his hands on the blanket. Then back at Pomfrey. Someone's been erasing my memories, he said. Not a question. Just a man, a boy, dropping the thing into the space between them to see what shape it made when it landed. Yes. Since I was a baby. The pattern suggests even earlier interventions that have since fully integrated and can't be individually distinguished. 67 is the count of charms applied after your magical core had developed enough to leave distinct residue markers. Which happens around 12 to 14 months of age. He was 11. He did the arithmetic without thinking about it, because mathematics was the one class the Dursleys had never been able to find a reason to sabotage. So 9.5 years, he said. Someone's been reaching into my head every, a few months. And taking things. The intervals vary. Longest gap is about 14 months. Shortest is 11 days. 11 days. Something in his voice changed on that. Went quieter. You said the most recent one was 11 days before I came to Hogwarts. Yes. So right before I got on the train. Right before I came here. Someone, he stopped, and the quiet became a different kind of quiet. Someone needed to make sure I arrived here not knowing something. Or not remembering something. McGonagall's jaw was tight enough to cut glass. Harry noticed. You already know who it was, he said, not to Pomfrey. To McGonagall. You both do. You figured it out already and that's why you look like that. McGonagall said, very carefully, we have a hypothesis. Who? Potter, Professor. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in it that was entirely new, a flatness, a precision, that had no business being in an 11-year-old's voice and yet fit there perfectly, like it had been waiting to emerge. Who? The silence stretched. Then McGonagall said, "We believe the magical signature is consistent with Albus Dumbledore." The name sat in the room with them. Harry looked at his hands again. At the thin scar tissue on his knuckles from the time Uncle Vernon had filed away. At the calluses from Dudley's bicycle that Harry had been made to repair while Dudley watched. Filed. At the normal, unremarkable topography of a boy's hands that had absorbed 11 years of unremarkable, unrecorded things. "Dumbledore," he said. "We don't know why," Pomfrey said. "We don't know what was taken." I know why," Harry said. Both women looked at him. "I don't know the specifics. But I know why." He looked up from his hands. His eyes were very green behind the patched glasses, very clear, and entirely lacking in the confusion or distress that both women had been bracing for. "Because I'm supposed to do something. Aren't I? That's the whole story. The boy who survived, there's a reason everyone calls me that, there's a reason it's what I am instead of just my name. I'm supposed to do something, and someone decided to make sure I got here a particular way, knowing particular things, feeling particular things." His voice was steady. The steadiness was not performance. It was something much more fundamental. "What I want to know is what they took. What they needed me not to know." Pomfrey and McGonagall looked at each other over his head in the way adults did when a child said something that reached past what they thought children could reach. "That," Pomfrey said quietly, "is going to take considerably more investigation." "Then start investigating." Harry pushed himself upright in the bed with the directness of someone who has decided the conversation has moved to its next phase. "And I want to be part of it. Whatever you find, I'm part of it. Not told at the end when the adults have sorted everything out. Part of it. You're 11 years old. And someone has been reaching into my head since I was 14 months old." His eyes didn't waver. "I think I've earned a seat at whatever table this ends up on." Another long look between the two women. Then McGonagall straightened in her chair and nodded once, a movement that was very small and very significant. "I'll contact Amelia Bones," she said. "She's the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She's someone I trust to do this correctly." "Is she Dumbledore's?" Harry asked, with a directness that made Pomfrey blink. "She is nobody's," McGonagall said. "Amelia Bones is entirely her own." "Good," Harry said. "That's who I want." He swung his legs out of the bed, and Pomfrey said, "You are not leaving this hospital wing." "I know. He stood up. He was short for 11, narrow-shouldered, wearing hospital pajamas that were slightly too large. And yet standing up, with his feet on the cold stone floor and his eyes on the tall windows and the morning coming in grey and bright across the grounds, he looked somehow considerably larger than his physical dimensions suggested. "I needed to stand up," he said. "I've been horizontal while finding out something like that. I needed to stand up." Neither woman argued with that. They waited while he stood at the window and watched the grounds for a moment, the lake still and silver, the edge of the forbidden forest dark and absolute at the perimeter of the castle's green. And then he turned around, and his face had resolved into something that was going to be very difficult for certain people when he was older. "Can you tell me," he said, "what's in the parts of my memory that are still intact? What the scan shows I do still know. I want to understand what's missing by mapping what's there." Pomfrey picked up her clipboard. "Sit back down," she said. "This is going to take a while." He sat. And they began. The message reached Albus Dumbledore at 8:30, in the form of a small square of parchment delivered via Fawkes, who had brought it from McGonagall's office with the particular urgency the Phoenix used when he'd been asked rather than choosing. Dumbledore unfolded it over his breakfast. He had been in his office since 6, rested, serene, processing the events of the night before with the practiced equanimity of a man who had been managing crises for over a century. The note read, "Poppy ran a revelio profundis. We need to talk. Come to the hospital wing before the students are awake." Dumbledore set down his fork. He looked at the note for a moment, at Minerva's handwriting, sharp, precise, slightly leftward leaning, the handwriting of a woman who had learned penmanship at a time when penmanship was a discipline. He picked up his fork again. He finished his egg. He folded the note into quarters and placed it in the pocket of his robe, and then he rose, and settled his half-moon spectacles on his nose, and walked to the hospital wing with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who has decided exactly how he is going to enter a room before he enters it. The hospital wing doors swung open without him touching them, a small, automatic courtesy his magic extended because he'd long ago stopped bothering to reach for door handles, and he came in to find 3 people waiting for him. Pomfrey, standing by her office door with her clipboard. McGonagall, standing beside bed 1 with her arms folded. And Harry Potter, sitting on the edge of bed 1 in hospital pajamas, with his feet on the floor and his green eyes fixed on the door. Dumbledore had a very good face. Decades of diplomacy and war and loss had given him a face that could present whatever was needed when it was needed. The face he presented now was warm, faintly concerned, the face of a grandfather arriving at a sickbed. "Harry," he said, moving towards the boy. "I'm so relieved to see you awake. You gave us quite the fright last." Madame Pomfrey found 67 memory charms in my head, Harry said. No preamble. No softening. Just the fact, placed down like a stone. They date back to when I was 14 months old. The most recent one was applied 11 days before I came to Hogwarts. She identified the magical signature. He paused for one beat. "We know it was you." Dumbledore stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the hospital wing, 6 feet from Harry's bed, and something happened behind his eyes, very briefly, very quickly, dawn before it fully formed, and then it was replaced by a sorrow that was real enough, Pomfrey thought, which was the most complicated thing about it. The sorrow was genuine. It didn't make the rest of it better, but it was genuine. "I see," he said. "I'm not asking if it was you," Harry said. "I'm telling you that we know it was. What I'm asking is why. What did you take? And what was it supposed to accomplish?" McGonagall said, very quietly, "Albus." It was just his name. Just the one word, in the voice of a woman who had known him for 50 years. But the way she said it, the specific flatness of it, the weight, made Dumbledore close his eyes briefly and reopen them, and when he did his face had changed. The grandfather warmth was still there, but underneath it now something more honest was visible. Something tired. "May I sit?" he asked. "No," Harry said. A pause. McGonagall made a very slight movement, and Pomfrey watched her decide not to countermand the boy's instruction. The decision to not countermand it seemed to cost her something and give her something simultaneously. Dumbledore nodded, once. He clasped his hands behind his back and stood. "Harry. There are things I will need to explain to you that are considerable in their scope. I would ask, are you going to tell me it was for my own good? I was going to say that I would ask for the opportunity to explain them fully and without interruption. But," his eyes moved to Pomfrey, then McGonagall, then back to Harry, "I suspect from the presence of Poppy and the look on Minerva's face that this conversation is already a formality. That the Ministry has already been contacted." "The DMLE will be here this afternoon," McGonagall said. Amelia Bones, specifically. Something crossed Dumbledore's face at that name. Not fear. Dumbledore, to his credit, did not appear to experience fear in its conventional form. Something more like adjustment. Recalibration. "Amelia is thorough," he said. "That's rather the point," Pomfrey said. "I want to hear it from you first," Harry said. He leaned forward on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, watching the headmaster with the focused attention of someone who has decided to understand something completely before deciding what to do about it. "Before the Ministry. Before all of it. I want to hear you say it. What did you take from me, and why?" The hospital wing was very quiet. Distantly, the castle was waking up, footsteps in corridors, the far-off sound of the great hall beginning to populate for breakfast, the particular hum that a building full of children produces when they've all begun to move at once. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter for a long moment. And in that moment, Poppy Pomfrey saw something she had not expected to see. The old man looked, for just a breath, as though he might be about to apologize. Not explain. Not justify. Apologize. Then the moment passed, and the explanation arrived instead. You are, as you have no doubt begun to suspect, the subject of a prophecy, he said. A prophecy that names you as the one with the power to defeat Lord Voldemort. The circumstances of that prophecy, and its implications for your life, are, that's not what I asked. Harry's voice was quiet but absolutely unyielding. I know about the prophecy. Voldemort went after my parents because of a prophecy, everyone knows that, even if they dance around it. That's not news. His eyes didn't leave Dumbledore's face. What I'm asking is what specifically you took from my memory. What did 11-year-old Harry Potter need to not know when he got on the Hogwarts Express? What did 14-month-old Harry Potter need to have erased? Those are specific things. And you know what they are. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that stretched until it became, unmistakably, a deflection. Some of what was, managed, related to information about your parents. Their history. The full circumstances of, their history, Harry repeated. You erased my memories of information about my parents. You were a child. Some of it was traumatic. The circumstances of, you erased my memories. The repetition was quiet and it was devastating in a way that had nothing to do with volume. Of my parents. For my own protection. Harry, I don't have a single real memory of them. His voice didn't crack. It remained exactly level, which was its own kind of unbearable to listen to. I've never had, I've been told they were wonderful people and I have to take everyone else's word for it because I have nothing. No real image of my mother's face. No memory of my father's voice. I thought that was just because I was too young. I was a baby. Babies don't remember. He paused. But 14 months is old enough to form memories. I looked it up, in the library, in March. 14-month-old children form lasting memories. They retain emotional memories in particular with very high reliability. Another pause. You took them. The process was, Dumbledore began, and McGonagall said, Albus. Stop. He stopped. McGonagall walked from beside bed one to stand between Dumbledore and Harry, which put her facing Dumbledore, which was not where she'd been standing for the last 50 years. You will, she said, in the quiet, contained voice she used when a Gryffindor had done something genuinely unforgivable, have the full opportunity to present your reasoning to Amelia Bones this afternoon. At which point, whatever your reasoning is, it will be evaluated by someone other than the people you trust to understand you. She looked at him steadily. That's how this works now, Albus. We're past the point where your explanations are sufficient on their own. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Minerva, he said, and there was genuine pain in his voice. This afternoon, she said. Until then, I'm going to ask you to leave the hospital wing. A beat. Please. The please was the most devastating part. It meant she was still trying to extend him some dignity. It meant she hadn't fully finished grieving the thing she trusted. Dumbledore left. He wasn't gone for 10 minutes before the doors opened again, and this time it was Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, still in their pajamas, both slightly out of breath from running and both stopping dead in the doorway at the sight of Harry sitting on the edge of the bed looking like something had fundamentally shifted in his understanding of the universe. Harry, Hermione said. You're awake. We've been waiting since 5, we literally have not left this corridor, Ron said. Well. We went for breakfast. But we came back. Harry looked at them, at Ron's anxious freckled face and Hermione's eyes that were doing the thing they did when she was frightened but processing it through concern for someone else, and something in him eased slightly. Not the thing that had been wound tight since Pomfrey had said 67. That was still there, still wound. But something adjacent to it eased. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you. I need to tell you something." "Should they?" Pomfrey began. "They're part of this," Harry said, with the same certainty he'd used when he'd said he wanted a seat at the table. "They've been part of whatever this is since September. They deserve to know." He looked at his two best friends. "You're going to want to sit down," he said. "Seriously. Pull up chairs." Ron pulled up 2 chairs with the speed of someone who has correctly identified that the situation is serious. Hermione sat down and folded her hands in her lap with the particular posture she used when she was preparing to absorb information at high speed. Harry told them. He told it straightforwardly, without dramatic preamble, the way he discovered worked best, just the facts in order, and let the weight of them land where they landed. 67 memory charms. 10 years. The magical signature. The memories of his parents. The confrontation with Dumbledore. When he finished, Ron said, "Bloody hell," in a voice that was almost entirely exhaled breath, and Hermione said nothing for 30 seconds and then said, "How old were the charms?" The precise interval distribution across the 10-year span. "Hermione," Ron said. "I'm processing," she said tightly. "What was the interval distribution?" "Pomfrey, do you still have the scan?" Pomfrey, who had been watching the 3 children with an expression that Minerva McGonagall would have recognized as the look of a woman being reminded why she'd chosen this job, produced the scroll. Hermione unrolled it across the bed and she and Harry bent over it together while Ron looked over their shoulders and made occasional sounds of disbelief. And something about the 3 of them bent over that parchment, the dark head and the red head and the bushy hair, all bent toward the same problem, made Pomfrey look away and blink, once, hard. "The gaps," Hermione said, tracing the columns with her finger. "Look at these. The longest gap, 14 months, lines up with," she reached into the pocket of her dressing gown and produced, because this was Hermione Granger and she apparently carried reference texts even to emergency vigils, a small wizarding calendar. She cross-referenced. Her face changed. "Harry. The longest gap lines up with when your parents went into hiding." Harry looked at the calendar. Then at the scan. "So while they were in hiding, no one could get to me. And the charms resume," she traced forward, 4 months after they died. "After you went to the Dursleys." She looked up. Her eyes were bright with the particular brightness they got when she was furious and intellectual at the same time, which was arguably the most dangerous state she had. "Someone had access to you at the Dursleys. Regularly. For 9 years. Without your knowledge." "Without the Dursleys' knowledge," Harry said. "They'd have noticed a wizard visiting." "Not if they were obliviated too," Hermione said, and the word landed in the room like a dropped blade. Pomfrey sat down. Ron said, "Right, so the headmaster has been breaking into my best friend's head since he was a baby to take out memories, and possibly also modifying his muggle relatives, and this is," he stopped. "This is massive, isn't it? This isn't just a Hogwarts thing. This is a whole thing," Harry agreed. "The ministry's coming this afternoon." "Amelia Bones." Ron made a face that was complicated. "My dad talks about Bones. Says she's the straightest arrow in the ministry." "Good. He also says Dumbledore's terrified of her, though he'd never," Ron stopped himself, reorganized. "Which is, given the circumstances. Good. Yeah." Harry looked at the scroll again. At the columns of charm residues, each one a small, precise excision from his own mind. He thought about the dreams, the green light, the warm voice, and understood now that they weren't imagination filling a gap but memory leaking around the edges of an imperfect seal. 67 imperfect seals. Because you couldn't charm a living mind the way you could lock a box. It found ways out. It seeped. He'd been leaking his own history for 10 years and hadn't known what the feeling was. I want a list, he said. Hermione looked up from the scroll. Of everything that might have been taken. Every gap. Every moment in the pattern where the charm was applied and what I should have been experiencing at that point in my life that I have no memory of. He met her eyes. Can you help me build it? Hermione looked at the scroll. Then at Harry. Then she straightened up and said, in the tone she used when she had accepted a task and was already 3 steps ahead in its execution, I'm going to need paper. And I'm going to need someone to tell me everything they remember about your parents that you've never been able to corroborate yourself. Starting with, she paused, starting with Sirius Black. Harry went very still. He was your godfather, Hermione said. He was there. He knew your parents. He knew what your childhood was supposed to look like. And he's in Azkaban. She met Harry's eyes. On Dumbledore's testimony. The hospital wing was very, very quiet. Ron broke it. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying, Hermione said carefully, that if someone wanted to ensure Harry arrived at Hogwarts a certain way, knowing certain things and not others, feeling a certain kind of alone, it would be enormously convenient if the one adult in the world who was legally and emotionally bonded to Harry, who would have fought any attempt to place him with the Dursleys, who would have told him the full truth from the beginning, she stopped. Was in Azkaban, Harry said. Was in Azkaban. Harry stood up again. He walked to the window. The grounds were full now, students crossing the lawn toward breakfast, none of them knowing that up here, in the hospital wing, the story they'd all grown up with, the official story, the clean story, the story of the boy who lived, was in the process of being entirely dismantled. Pomfrey, he said, without turning from the window. Yes. When Amelia Bones gets here this afternoon. I want to be in the room. I assumed you would. And I want my friends in the room. Mr. Potter, they're smarter than most adults I've met. He turned from the window, and his eyes were very clear. No offense. None taken, Pomfrey said, which was not what she'd been going to say but was, she decided, more honest. Harry looked at Ron and Hermione. Ron was chewing his lip in the way he did when he was scared but committed. Hermione already had her quill out and was beginning to write. Right, Harry said. Let's figure out what they took. Amelia Bones arrived at 2:30 with 2 unspeakables and a recorder and the kind of face that suggested she had been in more difficult rooms than this one and had not blinked in any of them. She was a square-jawed woman in her mid-50s with short iron gray hair and a monocle that she wore with the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who has worn the same accessory for 30 years and stopped noticing other people's opinions of it. She looked at Harry Potter sitting beside Pomfrey's desk, at Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley flanking him like small, fierce bodyguards, at McGonagall standing by the window with her arms folded, at the 14-foot scroll laid out on the examination table. Mr. Potter, she said, extending a hand across the desk. Amelia Bones. Head of the DMLE. A pause. I knew your parents. Harry shook her hand. What were they like, he asked, and the directness of it, the fact that it was the first thing he asked, the simple naked want of it, made Bones look at him for a moment with something that wasn't pity but was adjacent to it. Your mother was one of the sharpest witches I've ever met, she said. Your father was reckless and brilliant and funny in the particular way that people are when they're not afraid. She held his gaze. You have her eyes and his complete absence of self-preservation instinct. Harry smiled at that. It was small, and it was his first smile of the day, and it sat on his face like it meant something. Now, Bones said, pulling out her own chair and sitting, show me what you found. Pomfrey showed her. The examination of the scroll took 40 minutes. Bones's 2 unspeakables, a thin man named Croker who had the quiet of someone who had spent decades in the Department of Mysteries, and a younger woman named Fawcett, bent over the parchment with their own instruments, running verification charms, confirming measurements, cross-referencing magical signatures against ministry records. They spoke to each other in low technical murmurs that Hermione was visibly straining to follow and occasionally succeeding. When it was done, Bones set down her monocle, polished it with a cloth, replaced it, and said, "The signature is confirmed. The charm architecture is consistent with a 7th-level practitioner with advanced knowledge of developmental magical psychology. There are 6 wizards alive who match this profile." She picked up her quill. "Only one of them has had ongoing access to Harry Potter since 1981. McGonagall, at the window, said nothing. But her chin lifted by about a millimeter. "I'll need to interview the headmaster," Bones said. "Today, if possible." "He's in his office," McGonagall said. "He's been there since this morning. He hasn't tried to leave the grounds." Something in that last sentence made Bones's eyebrows move slightly. "You checked?" "I asked the portraits to watch." "Prudent." Bones made a note. "Mr. Potter. I want you to know that this investigation will be conducted properly, thoroughly, and without regard to," she paused, and something very precise happened in her phrasing, "without regard to the reputation of any individual. Regardless of who that individual is or what offices they hold." "I know," Harry said. "That's why McGonagall called you specifically." Bones glanced at McGonagall. "Is it?" "Apparently." McGonagall's tone was approximately neutral. Bones stood, rolling up her own copy of the findings. "I'll see Dumbledore now. Mr. Potter," she paused at the door, "we will find out what was taken. It's going to take time. The process of identifying what specific memories were removed requires a specialist, a memory architect, and there are only 2 in Britain. But we will find out." "Thank you," Harry said. After she'd gone, with her unspeakables behind her, the hospital wing was quiet for a moment. Then Ron said, "She's quite something, isn't she?" "Yes," McGonagall agreed, and her voice had a quality in it that none of them could quite name. It sounded like relief. It sounded like someone handing a weight to someone else and feeling the difference in their shoulders. Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "It's starting," he said. "What is?" Hermione asked. "Whatever this actually is." He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban. About green light in his dreams. About the warm voice he'd never been able to make sound like anything. The real story. Not the one they've been telling. Outside, through the tall hospital wing windows, the afternoon sun was doing something spectacular over the lake, throwing light across the water in long, gold sheets, and the forbidden forest at the edge of the grounds was absolutely still, and the castle hummed around them with the quiet life of a building that had been standing for 1,000 years and had seen, it seemed, rather less than was actually happening within it. Harry Potter sat in bed and waited for the real story to begin. He was, for the first time in his memory, entirely unafraid. Chapter 2, The Architecture of Forgetting. The interview with Dumbledore lasted 3 hours. Harry knew this because McGonagall came back to the hospital wing at 6 o'clock with the particular walk she had when she'd been sitting in a difficult room for a long time, slightly more deliberate than usual, each step placed with the care of someone managing something large and interior. She didn't say anything about the interview immediately. She asked Pomfrey if there was tea, accepted a cup, and stood at the window drinking it while Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched her from their chairs with the unified patience of 3 people who had learned when to wait. "He admitted to 23 of them," she said finally, still facing the window. 23, Harry said. "Out of 67. He says the remaining 44 are, in his words, not memory charms in the conventional sense. He claims they are what he calls architectural modifications. Adjustments to how certain memories are accessed rather than removals of the memories themselves." She turned from the window. Her face was the face she used in Transfiguration when a student had made a fundamental error and she was deciding how to address it without being cruel. Amelia Bones's response to that distinction was, a pause, succinct. "What did she say?" Hermione asked. "She said the distinction between removing a memory and sealing it so completely that it cannot be accessed by the person who owns it is a distinction that exists in Albus Dumbledore's philosophy and nowhere in magical law." Ron let out a breath. So he's admitting to 23, claiming the rest don't count, and Amelia has referred the matter to the Wisengamot's Oversight Committee, McGonagall said. Which means it becomes a formal investigation with legal standing. Dumbledore cannot, she stopped herself. Chose words carefully. The investigation cannot be managed from within Hogwarts. It has moved outside the school's authority. Harry had been quiet through this. He was watching McGonagall with the attentiveness he used when he was taking something apart to understand it. What were the 23, he asked. The ones he admitted to. He was not specific. He referred to them as, she set down her cup with a precision that was not quite gentle, protective interventions. Designed to ensure you could navigate your childhood without knowledge that would have been dangerous or destabilizing for a child to carry. He decided, Harry said. What a child could carry. Yes. About my own memories. My own history. Yes. Without asking anyone. Without asking my parents, they were alive until I was 15 months old. Without asking my godfather. Without any legal, there is no legal framework, McGonagall said quietly, that permits what he did. That is rather the point. Harry stood up. He'd been sitting in the same chair for 4 hours and the restlessness that he'd been keeping in check came out now in a single fluid movement. He stood, shoved his hands in the pockets of his hospital pajamas, and walked to the far end of the ward and back again. Not agitated. Processing. There was a difference, and all 3 of the people watching him saw it. The 23 he admits to, he said, on the return trip. If he's calling them protective, and the remaining 44 he's calling architectural, then what he's actually telling us is that there are 2 separate things going on. Things he wanted me to forget entirely. And things he wanted me to not be able to think about clearly. He stopped walking. Which is worse? The second, Hermione said immediately. The first, a removed memory is gone. It's clean. The second means the memory is still there, you just can't reach it, which means it's been influencing you from underneath. Shaping how you feel and think and react to things without you ever knowing why. Ron stared at her. That's genuinely horrible. Yes, Hermione said. It is. Harry looked at the tall windows. Outside, the grounds were going dark, that particular blue-gray of a Scottish evening coming in over the lake. I want the memory architect, he said. Bones mentioned too, McGonagall said. I'll make inquiries tonight. I don't want to wait for the investigation's timeline. If someone can tell me what was sealed, what's still in there, just, locked away, I want access to my own head. McGonagall looked at him steadily. Some of those memories may be difficult. My parents are dead, Harry said flatly. I've been living with the Dursleys for 9 years. I don't think difficult is going to be new territory. He met her eyes. I want what's mine. That's it. I want what's mine. She nodded. I'll find you a memory architect, she said. Croaker came back the next morning alone, without Bones, which meant he was here informally. He was a small, dry man with the particular quality of stillness that people who work in the Department of Mysteries develop after years of being around things that react badly to sudden movements. He arrived at 7, when the hospital wing was bright with morning sun and Harry had already been awake for 2 hours, sitting cross-legged on his bed with Hermione's list spread across his knees. The list had grown. It now occupied 6 sheets of parchment and was organized by year and probable content, built from a combination of the scan's charm application dates, everything Ron and Hermione had read about Harry's parents, and the particular geography of Harry's own dream memories, the impressions that had leaked around the edges of 67 imperfect seals. Hermione had done the organizing. Harry had done the remembering, which had been its own complicated process, sitting in the dark of the hospital wing at 2 in the morning going carefully through the map of things he couldn't quite reach. Croaker knocked on the door frame before entering, which told Harry something about him before he'd said a word. People who knocked before entering rooms were people who understood about spaces that belonged to others. "Mr. Potter," he said. "My name is Saul Croker. I'm an unspeakable, which means that everything I say to you in a professional capacity is protected under the secrecy statutes. I cannot be compelled to testify about our conversations, and neither can you, unless you choose to waive that protection. I want you to understand that before we start." "Why would I want that protection?" Harry asked. Croker sat down in the chair beside the bed without being invited, which was the kind of self-possession Harry respected. "Because some of what I'm going to tell you this morning may change the scope of this investigation significantly. And until you've decided what you want to do with it, it might be useful to have it be contained." Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione gave a very small nod that meant she'd already started evaluating and hadn't found a reason to object. He looked at Ron, who shrugged in the way that meant "I trust your call." "All right," Harry said. "Talk." Croker reached into his robes and produced a folder. Not a scroll, a folder, which was unusual. Unspeakables tended toward unusual organizational preferences. He opened it on his knee and looked at the top page for a moment before looking up at Harry. "The memory charm signature on your diagnostic has been confirmed as Dumbledore's. That's the element of this you already know." He turned the first page. "What Madame Bones has not yet shared with you, because she is waiting for full verification, is what my department found when we ran the charm signature backward." Harry waited. "Memory charms leave a residue. You know this, it's on your scan. But what most people don't know is that in cases of repeated application by the same practitioner, the residues build up in layers. Like sediment. And within that sediment, if you know how to read it," Croker turned the folder around and held it out, "you can find echoes. Impressions of what was removed." Harry took the folder. He looked at the page Croker had turned it to. It was dense, columns of magical notation, the particular shorthand of unspeakable analysis that looked like it had been designed by someone who considered legibility an optional feature. But Hermione had immediately leaned over his shoulder and was reading it at speed. "These are fragments," she said. "From the removed memories. You can recover, fragments only," Croker said. "We can't restore a removed memory. That's not possible. But the sediment gives us context. Subject matter. Emotional register. Sometimes names." He paused. "Mr. Potter. The fragments from your earliest charms, the ones applied from 14 months to approximately 3 years of age, are almost entirely consistent with one subject matter." "My parents," Harry said. "Your parents. Specifically, conversations about your parents. About their history. About who they were, where they came from, why they were who they were." Croker's voice was dry and precise and held his own reaction to what he was reporting at a careful distance. "Someone spoke to you about your parents in the period immediately after their deaths. Someone spent significant time with you. And that, all of it, was subsequently removed." "Who?" Harry asked. "Can the fragments tell you who was there?" "In one instance, yes." Croker reached over and indicated a line midway down the page. "There is a name in the sediment of the third charm, applied when you were approximately 18 months old. The emotional register of the surrounding memory is high. Significant distress in the subject. Whatever this conversation was, it mattered deeply to you. A beat. The name is serious." The room was very quiet. Harry looked at the word on the page. At the echo of an 18-month-old child's distress wrapped around a name. "He was with me," Harry said. "After my parents died. He was there. For some period of time, yes." The fragments suggest, Croker chose his next words with the care of someone stepping through uncertain ground, the fragments suggest he was the primary caregiver in the immediate weeks following the events at Godric's Hollow. "Before you were placed with the Muggle family." Harry set the folder down. He looked at the far wall of the hospital wing. Ron had gone very still beside Hermione. Hermione's hand had found Harry's arm and was resting there without comment. So Dumbledore took him from me, Harry said. First he took the memories of Sirius. Then he put Sirius in Azkaban. And then he put me with the Dursleys. He paused. And every time I got close to finding any of this out, he came and took a bit more. That is a reasonable interpretation of the evidence, Croaker said. It's not an interpretation, Harry said. It's a sequence. Croaker looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone who respects precision. Yes, he said. It's a sequence. I need Sirius out of Azkaban. That is not, I know it's not simple. I'm not asking you to do it this morning. I'm telling you where this goes. Harry picked up the folder again. Turn to the next page. What else is in here? Croaker let the Sirius matter sit. He clearly knew enough about timing to know when to leave a statement where it landed, and turned to the next section. The charms applied in your middle years, 5 through 9, cluster around a different subject. Less emotional. More informational. Meaning. Meaning they were applied to suppress knowledge rather than feeling. The fragments from this cluster suggest you were told, on multiple occasions, substantive things about the wizarding world. About your heritage. About the nature of your own magic. Croaker paused. About your bloodline. Hermione made a very small sharp sound. Harry looked at her. What? He said. Your bloodline, she said carefully. Harry, your mother was Muggle-born. Or she was supposed to be. She looked at Croaker. Was she? Croaker's expression shifted by approximately 1 millimeter, which on his face was the equivalent of a dramatic reaction. That, he said, is one of the things that will require the memory architect to fully establish. The fragments suggest, and I want to be precise about this, the fragments suggest, that what was told to you about your mother's heritage was more complex than the standard account. She wasn't Muggle-born, Harry said. It wasn't a question. I cannot confirm, you just told me that the charms in my middle years were applied to suppress knowledge about my bloodline. And that what I was told about my mother's heritage was more complex than the standard account. Harry looked at Croaker steadily. You're an unspeakable. You chose those words. So I'm hearing them. Croaker was quiet for a moment. There are bloodline records in the Department of Mysteries that are, not publicly accessible, he said finally. Ancient records. Family lines that were deliberately obscured for various reasons across various historical periods. My department has been aware, for some time, that the Evans family line is, not what it appears in public records. How long have you been aware of that? Hermione asked, and her voice had an edge in it. 15 years, Croaker said. The silence after that was the kind that had weight. 15 years, Ron said. So before Harry was even born. The relevant discovery was made in 1979. The records were flagged. Their access was restricted. He looked at Harry. By the then chief warlock of the Wizengamot. Dumbledore, Harry said. Yes. Harry stood up. He did it smoothly, without the restless energy of the previous evening. This was a different quality of movement. Purposeful. He walked to the window, looked out for about 4 seconds, and turned back. He knew, Harry said. He knew what my mother was. He knew what that made me. And he's been managing, engineering, what I know about myself. For my entire life. The evidence supports that conclusion, Croaker said. What is she? Harry asked. What bloodline? That, Croaker said, I genuinely cannot tell you yet. The records are sealed. Unsealing them is part of what the formal investigation will pursue. But, and here his dry precision softened by approximately 1 degree, I can tell you that in 15 years of the Department of Mysteries having that information under restricted access, the file has been reviewed precisely 4 times. All 4 reviews were conducted by Albus Dumbledore. Harry absorbed that. Then he said, very quietly, he's been checking on it. Making sure it stays buried. That appears to be the case. All right. Harry came back to the bed. Sat down. Picked up Hermione's list and looked at it, the 6 sheets of careful organization, the mapped gaps, the years lined up in columns. I want 3 things. First, I want the memory architect as soon as McGonagall can get one here. Second, I want whatever verification process is needed to get Sirius Black a proper hearing, not exonerated on someone say so, an actual hearing with actual evidence. And third, he looked at Croaker, I want those bloodline records unsealed. The third is a Wisengamot matter. The investigation, I know. I'm telling you what I want so that you know where to direct the investigation. He held Croaker's gaze. I'm the subject of this. Not the recipient of findings. The subject. I want that understood. Croaker studied him for a long moment. This was an 11-year-old boy sitting in hospital pajamas on a hospital bed, and something about that fact and the statement that had just emerged from him sat in an interesting tension. Understood, Croaker said. Good. Harry set the list down. Now tell me what else the sediment fragments show. We haven't been through half this folder yet. They were 3/4 through the folder when the hospital wing doors opened and Dumbledore walked in. He didn't knock. He had never knocked at the hospital wing in 30 years of being headmaster. He came in the way he always came in, with the gentle, settled authority of someone who has never had to consider whether a space would receive him, and stopped when he saw Croaker, and something happened very briefly in his face. Saul, he said. I wasn't aware the department was conducting further interviews this morning. Good morning, Headmaster, Croaker said. The words were entirely neutral in the way that only trained neutrality achieves. Harry looked at Dumbledore. He had not seen him since the hospital wing confrontation the previous morning, and he had spent the intervening 24 hours doing something that he hadn't entirely consciously decided to do but that had happened anyway. He had processed his anger into something harder and more useful. Not cold, Harry Potter was not a cold person and had no ambition to become one, but precise. He had taken the heat of what he felt and instead of letting it scatter it outward, he'd let it burn inward and harden into something that would hold its shape. Headmaster, he said. Harry. Dumbledore's voice was warm. It was always warm. That was, Harry was beginning to understand, one of the things that made him so difficult to argue with. The warmth felt genuine because it was genuine, and the genuine warmth coexisted with everything else without apparent contradiction, and that coexistence made you question your own perception of everything else. I was hoping we might speak. Just the 2 of us. I'm in the middle of something, Harry said. Of course. I can wait, I'm in the middle of this investigation. This conversation. Harry gestured at Croaker and the folder. And I'm not interested in having a separate conversation with you that's just the 2 of us. He said it without heat. Completely matter of fact. Whatever you want to say to me, you can say here. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Hermione and Ron. Your friends are staying. Harry, some of what I need to discuss with you is sensitive, more sensitive than 67 memory charms. Harry asked. His voice was genuinely curious. Because that's already the baseline. I'm not sure what you could tell me that would require more privacy than that. Ron made a face that he immediately controlled. Hermione's quill had stilled on her parchment. Croaker had become exceptionally still, which was something because he was already very still. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. The look was complicated, there was pain in it, and something that was very close to respect, and something beneath both of those that was harder to name. Assessment, perhaps. Or recognition. You've changed, Dumbledore said quietly. I found out some things, Harry said. Changes tend to follow. Harry, Dumbledore moved to the chair beside the bed, McGonagall's chair from the previous night, and this time Harry didn't stop him sitting. Dumbledore sat, and his age showed differently when he sat, the vast accumulated weight of his years settling into the posture. He looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles, and his voice, when it came, was quieter. I owe you a great many explanations. I have always known that eventually, you owe me my memories, Harry said. The explanations are secondary. Where are the ones you removed? They cannot be restored. I know. Croaker explained the limitations. Harry leaned forward. Then tell me what they contained. Tell me what you took. Not in generalities, specifically. What did my mother tell me when I was 14 months old that you decided I couldn't know? What was Sirius saying to me at 18 months that you erased? What did I find out about my bloodline at age 7, at age 9, that you needed me to forget? Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the morning sounds of the castle moved through the walls around them, classes beginning somewhere above, the distant rumble of feet on staircases. Your mother, he said finally, was not what she appeared. I know. The Evans bloodline has been in restricted access in the Department of Mysteries for 15 years, Harry said. Reviewed 4 times by you. I know. Croaker told me. He watched Dumbledore's reaction to that, the slight shift, the recalibration, and filed it. What is she? What was she? Dumbledore looked at his own hands for a moment. His hands were extraordinary, long-fingered, scarred in places, the hands of a man who had lived a very full and often violent life. Lily Evans was the last living descendant of a bloodline that was believed extinct for 300 years, he said. A line of considerable power. Power of a specific and unusual type. He looked up. Power that transfers. Amplifies, through certain sacrifices. Power that, when combined with the particular curse that Voldemort used, created me, Harry said. Or created whatever I am. Yes. You arranged it, Harry said. His voice didn't rise. Didn't you? My parents, it wasn't chance. You knew what Lily was. You knew what kind of magic she carried. And you, he stopped, not because he'd lost the thought but because he was choosing how to say it. You positioned them. You made sure James and Lily met. You made sure they stayed together. You made sure that when Voldemort came looking for a target that matched the prophecy, they were exactly the right targets. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. Harry, Dumbledore began. Was my father in on it? Harry asked. Did James Potter know what you were doing? James was, did he know? No, Dumbledore said. Very quietly. James did not know. Did my mother? A longer pause. Lily suspected, toward the end. She was an exceptional witch. She put things together that, Dumbledore stopped. Something moved across his face that was real and complicated and not comfortable to look at. She confronted me, approximately 3 months before Voldemort found them. She understood more than I had intended her to understand. What did you tell her? The truth, Dumbledore said. Or most of it. And she forgave you? She did not forgive me. He paused again, and this time the pause had a different quality. She made a choice. A fully informed choice. She knew what she was. She understood what her sacrifice would mean. And she chose it. He met Harry's eyes. Your mother was the bravest person I have ever known. And she made that choice herself, with full knowledge, and no one compelled her. Harry was very still. But my father didn't get that choice. Silence. And I didn't get any choice at all, Harry said. I was made. Engineered. Positioned. And then had my memories modified for a decade to keep me in the right shape. To make sure I arrived here being exactly who you needed me to be. Dumbledore looked at him. I did what I believed was necessary to give me a weapon, Harry said. Against Voldemort. To save the wizarding world. By making me into one. Harry's voice was steady. The steadiness was the thing. It was the steadiness of someone who has passed through the stage of reaction and arrived at something clearer. You spent 50 years engineering a person. Engineering my grandparents, probably, arranging things so that Lily Evans existed in exactly the right place, with exactly the right bloodline, meeting exactly the right person. And then when your weapon was born, you spent 11 years making sure it arrived at the battlefield in exactly the right condition. You are not a weapon, Dumbledore said, and for the first time something in his voice had an edge of genuine protest. I'm not a weapon, Harry agreed. That's the problem with your plan, isn't it? You built a weapon and got a person. He picked up the folder from the bed. I'd like you to leave now. Dumbledore blinked. Harry, I'm in the middle of something, Harry said. Calmly. Completely. And I've heard what I needed to hear from you this morning. The rest can go to the Wisengamot. He met the old man's eyes, and there was nothing in his gaze that flinched or deferred. Just green, clear, and absolutely his own. You can leave. Dumbledore stood. He stood slowly, with the care of someone who is managing something heavy. He looked at Harry for one more moment, and Harry let him look, didn't look away, didn't soften it, just held the gaze. I am sorry, Dumbledore said. I know you are, Harry said. It doesn't change anything that you did. But I know you are. Dumbledore left. The doors swung closed behind him and the hospital wing was full of the sound of 3 people exhaling at approximately the same moment. Ron put his head in his hands and then took it out again. Hermione was gripping her quill hard enough that Harry could see the whites of her knuckles. Croaker looked at Harry and said, "That was necessary," Harry said. He set the folder back on his knees. Next page. The memory architect arrived 2 days later. Her name was Verity Aluasian, and she was 43 years old, West African by birth and British by training, and she came with a bag of equipment that clicked and hummed when she set it on the table beside Harry's bed. She was the kind of person who filled a room not with loudness but with certainty, not the showy certainty of someone performing confidence, but the settled certainty of someone who is very good at a difficult thing and has known it long enough for it to become simply true. She shook Harry's hand, sat down, and said, "Tell me about the dreams first. The ones that feel like memories." Harry told her. He was thorough. He'd been running through them mentally for 3 days now, cataloging the fragments, the green light, the woman's voice, the warmth and the cold and the falling, the fragment that surfaced sometimes that he'd always thought was a word but was actually a name he couldn't quite hear. He laid all of it out for her, and she listened without interrupting, making small precise notes in a notebook that she held in her left hand. When he was done she said, "The green light is the killing curse. You know that?" "Yes." "The warmth is maternal presence. The cold is its removal. The falling is the house. You were in a room when it happened, and the damage to the house was significant, and at 14 months a child processes structural collapse as falling because their frame of reference is gravity." She made another note. "The name you can't hear, can you get any closer to it? Any consonant, any length?" Harry closed his eyes. He went into the fragment carefully, the way you handle something fragile that you've picked up before and put down again. The voice, warm, saying a name. 2 syllables. 3. The first sound was, "It starts with something that isn't a consonant," he said. Or, "It starts with a sound that's open. Like a vowel but at the front of a word." "Lily," Aluasian said. Harry opened his eyes. "The name you can't hear is your mother saying her own name," Aluasian said gently. "She was teaching you to say it. 14-month-old children are in the active language acquisition stage, they often practice words by hearing them in context. Your mother would have said her own name to you, and your father's name." She paused. "The fragment you're reaching for is her teaching you to say Lily." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you get it back?" "Not the memory itself. But I can, She reached into her bag and produced a small crystal vial attached to a silver instrument that looked like a cross between a stethoscope and a compass. I can map the sealed ones. The 44 that were architecturally modified rather than removed. They're still in there. They're sealed, but your magic knows where they are. You've been dreaming the edges of them for years. She looked at him over the instrument. With your permission, I can locate each seal and assess its depth and integrity. I can't open them without Wizengamot authorization, that's the legal constraint, but I can map them. So that when the authorization comes through, we know exactly what we're dealing with. How long does it take? An hour. Maybe less. Do it, Harry said. Oluwasian worked in the particular quiet of someone in deep professional focus. She ran the silver instrument around the perimeter of Harry's magical core. He felt it as a kind of tickling pressure, like a finger being run gently along the inside of his skull, and she made notes and murmured low precise things to herself and occasionally said, in a way that could have meant anything. Ron sat in the corner and alternated between watching and pointedly looking at the ceiling, because he'd decided after about 10 minutes that watching your friend's memory be cartographed was too intimate to observe directly. Hermione sat at the table with Croaker's folder and her own notes and didn't watch but was clearly tracking every sound with her peripheral attention. When it was done, Oluwasian sat back and looked at her notebook for a long moment. 43 seals located, she said. The 44th was applied recently enough that it's fully integrated, that's the one from 11 days before you came to Hogwarts. It'll take the Wizengamot process to find it. She looked at Harry. But the 43, she paused, Harry. They're not all memory charms in the traditional sense. Croaker said they were architectural, some of them are. But some of them are something else. She looked at her notes. 12 of the 43 are what I'd call capacity limiters. What does that mean? Harry asked. It means they're not about memory at all, she said. They're about your magic. She met his eyes steadily. 12 of the seals in your magical architecture are not suppressing memories. They're suppressing your magical capacity. Your raw output. The potential your core is actually carrying. She paused. Mr. Potter. Without those limiters, your magical core reads as, she checked her notes, not because she needed to but because she was deciding how to say it, as significantly in excess of anything in the current standard classification system. The room was very quiet. Off the charts, Ron said, slowly. You're saying literally, I'm saying the standard classification system goes up to level 12, Oluwasian said. Harry's current suppressed output reads at level 9. I can extrapolate from the limiter profiles that his natural output is, considerably higher than 12. How considerably? Hermione asked, and her voice was very careful. I can't give you a number until the limiters are released, Oluwasian said. Because there's nothing to compare it to. Harry said nothing for a moment. He was looking at his hands again, the thin hands, the calluses, the scar tissue. He turned them over and looked at his palms, which looked like any boy's palms, unremarkable, nothing special. He capped me, Harry said. He capped my magic. Yes. For 11 years. The first limiter was applied when you were approximately 2 years old, Oluwasian said. Which is, developmentally, that's when a magical child's core begins its primary expansion phase. If you apply a limiter at that stage, the core grows within the limit, Hermione said. She'd stood up from the table. It doesn't strain against it. It adapts. She looked at Harry. You've been growing into a container that wasn't your real size. For 9 years. Yes, Oluwasian said. Harry looked at his hands for another moment. Then he put them flat on the blanket and looked up at Oluwasian. Can you remove the limiters? Removing memory seals requires Wizengamot authorization. Removing core limiters, she paused, technically falls under a different statute. The Bodily Magical Integrity Act of 1879. which states that no person may have their magical capacity artificially suppressed without their informed consent. She met his eyes. The application of these limiters to a child who could not consent is a violation of that act. Removing them, however, requires only your consent, since you are the affected party, and a licensed memory and core architect. She looked at her silver instrument. Which I am. Harry looked at her. How long does it take to remove 12 limiters? She calculated. 3 hours. Give or take. Side effects. The release will be significant. Your core has been operating at a fraction of its capacity for 9 years. When the limiters come off, the expansion will be rapid. You'll experience what I describe as a magical surge, possibly lasting several hours. Possibly longer, depending on the magnitude. She kept her eyes on his. It will not be comfortable. But it won't be dangerous. When can we start? Harry asked. Alyoasian looked at him. Then she smiled, not widely, but with the quality of someone who has just confirmed a hypothesis. Tomorrow morning, she said. I want a full night's rest from you first. And I want Madame Pomfrey on standby. Done, Harry said. That night, in the hospital wing, with Hermione asleep in a conjured chair and Ron snoring with the untroubled thoroughness of someone who processes emotional upheaval through unconsciousness, Harry lay in the bed and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the dreams and what he now knew they were. He thought about his mother teaching him her name, and the small echo of that moment that had survived 67 attempts to remove it. He thought about Sirius Black, who had held him when he was a baby, who had told him things about his parents that a man in Azkaban had been unable to protect. He thought about what tomorrow would feel like. He was not afraid of it. He was curious, genuinely, cleanly curious, and below the curiosity was something else, something that had no name exactly, but felt like coming to the edge of a space that had always been there and finally being allowed to see how large it actually was. He fell asleep with that feeling. And he didn't dream of green light. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he dreamed of nothing at all, just rest, clean and dark in his own, without any edges seeping through. The next morning, Alyoasian arrived at 8 with her bag and her instruments and the brisk, focused manner of a surgeon preparing an operating room. She spent 20 minutes setting up while Harry ate the breakfast Pomfrey had brought. He ate all of it, which he didn't always do, because Alyoasian had been firm about nutritional preparation and Harry had developed in the last 3 days a habit of following Alyoasian's instructions without requiring explanation. McGonagall came to watch. She stood at the far end of the ward with her hands clasped behind her back and her face arranged in its most controlled expression, which meant she was managing something significant internally. At 8:45, Alyoasian said, "Ready?" "Yes," Harry said. "It's going to feel large," she said. "Whatever large means for you, multiply it. Don't fight it. The only thing that makes this worse is if you try to contain it." "I won't contain it," Harry said. She began. The first limiter came off at 8:51, and it felt like a window being opened in a room that had been sealed for years, a rush of air, cool and vast, and something expanding where there hadn't been room to expand before. Harry exhaled and gripped the mattress and didn't fight it. The second came off at 9:03. The third at 9:17. By the fifth, the lights in the hospital wing had begun to flicker in a way that had nothing to do with the castle's electrical non-system and everything to do with the fact that raw magic was displacing the air in the room. By the ninth, a crack had appeared in the stone of the wall beside Harry's bed. Not structural, a surface crack, a harmless thing, but the kind that happens when magical pressure has been building in a space and finds a way to express it. Pomfrey looked at it and at Harry and back at it and then looked at McGonagall with an expression that McGonagall returned with one of her own. The 12th limiter came off at 11:38. The silence afterward was absolute, and then it wasn't, because the windows blew open simultaneously with a sound like a single loud breath, and every piece of equipment in Pomfrey's office rattled on its shelves, and the candles, unlit, it was morning, burst into flame all at once down the length of the ward. Harry sat in the middle of it with his hands flat on his knees and his eyes open and his breathing slow and enormous, and the air around him had taken on a quality that Aluasian would later describe in her report as luminous but that McGonagall, standing at the far end of the ward watching it happen, would describe to Pomfrey afterward simply as, like standing near a lightning strike that never quite arrives. "Harry," Aluasian said. Her voice was steady. "Talk to me." "I'm here," he said. His voice was his own, same voice, same cadence, but something in the resonance had shifted. Like a bell that has been tapped with a finger versus one that has been struck properly. "I'm here." He paused, and a long, slow breath went through him. "I'm all right." "What do you feel?" He thought about it. He turned his hands over and looked at his palms again. "Like I've been reading by candlelight for 9 years, he said, and someone just turned on all the lights. McGonagall made a sound at the far end of the ward that she immediately swallowed. But not fast enough. Harry heard it, and looked at her, and the look between them, the woman who had left him on a doorstep because she'd been told to, and the boy who had grown up on that doorstep, was complicated and real and held everything that hadn't been said in the past 48 hours. "Professor," Harry said, and his voice was entirely gentle. "It's all right." She pressed her lips together and nodded once, sharply, and looked at the window. Harry looked at his hands. He turned them over. He did nothing flashy, no burst of light, no dramatic demonstration. He simply sat there with the full scope of what he actually was settling into him like water finding its level, quiet and thorough and inevitable. "Right," he said, when the feeling had steadied. "I want to see Sirius Black." Chapter 3, The Breeding Files. The visitor request for Azkaban went through Bones, because everything went through Bones now. She'd established that in the first hour of the investigation, all requests, all interviews, all access, came through her office. It was not a power grab. It was the administrative equivalent of building a wall around something fragile so that people with less delicate intentions couldn't reach it first. Harry understood that and appreciated it without needing to say so. Bones's response came back in 18 hours, not yet. Her note to McGonagall explained why. Sirius Black's case was more complicated than a simple visitor request because Sirius Black had never had a trial. Which meant that legally, formally, in the eyes of the Ministry of Magic, Sirius Black was being held on the basis of Dumbledore's testimony and nothing else, no Veritaserum, no Wisengamot hearing, no formal conviction. He was in Azkaban the way you put something in a drawer when you don't want to deal with it, not locked away properly but simply placed somewhere inconvenient to reach. Harry read the note twice. Then he wrote back to Bones directly, in his own handwriting, on his own parchment, which Fawkes declined to carry so he used a school owl instead. The note said, if he never had a trial, how is he legally a prisoner? He's not. He's a kidnapping victim. Retrieve him accordingly. Harry Potter. Bones's response arrived 4 hours later and consisted of a single line, I am going to enjoy working with you, Mr. Potter. Proceedings begin Friday. It was Wednesday. Harry had 2 days. He spent the first one in the hospital wing doing something that looked, from the outside, like lying around recovering but was actually a systematic and thorough examination of his own magic. He did it quietly, without show, the way you might take inventory of a room you've newly moved into, opening drawers, testing windows, learning where the floor creaks. Aluasian had told him to take it slowly. He took it at the pace that felt right, which was faster than slowly but not reckless, and discovered several things. The first thing was that his magic now responded before the thought was complete. Not dramatically, it didn't throw sparks or rattle the furniture, but there was a quickness to it, a readiness, that hadn't been there before the limiters came off. Like the difference between a horse that's been standing in a stall for 9 years and one that's been in a field. The basic capability was the same. The condition was not. The second thing was that wandless magic, which had always been accidental for him, the unwanted results of stress or anger or fear, was now accessible deliberately. Not with full control yet, but accessible. He could light a candle without his wand. He could summon his glasses from the nightstand. Small things, done quietly, without announcing them. He did not announce them. The third thing was harder to define. It had to do with awareness. The castle felt different now, not in any mystical sense, nothing dramatic, but he was more conscious of it as a space with its own properties. The magic in the walls, old and layered and enormously complex, registered in his peripheral sense in a way it hadn't before. Like moving from a black and white photograph to color. Everything the same. Everything different. He mentioned none of this to anyone except Hermione, that evening, when Ron had gone for dinner and they were briefly alone. The awareness thing is interesting, Hermione said immediately. There's historical precedent for that. Magical cores above a certain threshold begin to interact with environmental magic in a kind of passive resonance. It's in Oluwasian's third paper. I found it in the library this afternoon. She produced a scroll with the air of someone who had been waiting to produce it. She calls it ambient attunement. It's documented in 4 cases in the last 2 centuries, all involving core outputs that exceeded the standard classification ceiling. 4 cases, Harry said. In 200 years. She looked at him steadily. Harry, I need you to understand what that means. Not so you feel special, so you understand the scope of what Dumbledore suppressed. 4 people in 200 years have had this level of ability documented. He took that from you for 9 years. Harry was quiet for a moment. He was afraid of what I'd be if I knew, he said. Or afraid you'd be harder to manage, Hermione said, and her voice was flat. Those aren't different things, Harry said. She considered that. No, she said. I suppose they're not. Croaker came back Thursday morning with a woman Harry hadn't seen before. She was perhaps 60, with close-cropped white hair and a face that looked like it had made a decision about 40 years ago and hadn't changed its mind since. She carried a leather case that was thicker than Croaker's folder and walked with the directness of someone who has never found it useful to soften an entrance. This is Director Aldrich, Croaker said. She heads the Legacy Records Division of the Department of Mysteries. Which records? Harry asked. Bloodline records, Aldrich said, sitting without preamble. Family histories. Magical inheritance documentation. The kind of records that tell you who came from whom and what that meant and what they could do. She opened her case on the table beside Harry's bed with a series of precise clicks. I've been in this department for 31 years. In that time, I have seen 2 sets of records sealed by the Chief Warlock without explanation and without review period. Both sets were sealed in 1979. She looked at Harry over a pair of reading glasses that she wore on the end of her nose. One concerns your mother's family. The other concerns a meeting. What kind of meeting? Hermione asked, from her chair. A meeting between Albus Dumbledore and a woman named Kira Sloane in the spring of 1945, Aldrich said. At which meeting, according to the session notes that were filed before the sealing order was applied, Dumbledore presented a theoretical framework he called the convergence doctrine. She let that sit. What is the convergence doctrine? Harry asked. Aldrich produced a document from her case. It was old. The parchment had the brittle, foxed quality of things that are genuine antiques rather than merely aged, and she handled it with the automatic care of someone who has handled irreplaceable things for 3 decades. In Dumbledore's own words, from the session notes, the convergence doctrine is, she read, the deliberate engineering of bloodline intersection to produce a magical individual of sufficient power and specific resonance to serve as the terminus point of a prophesied conflict. Silence. Terminus point, Harry said. His term. He wrote that down, Ron said. He actually wrote that down. In official session notes. In 1945, Aldrich said. Which tells you that this was not a sudden decision made in response to Voldemort's rise. This was a theory that Dumbledore had been developing since before Tom Riddle was even out of Hogwarts. She looked at Harry. The 1945 meeting was with a legacy record specialist who was being consulted on historical bloodline data. Specifically, bloodlines that had been believed extinct. Bloodlines with unusual magical properties. The Evans line, Harry said. The Evans line was rediscovered in the legacy records in 1943, by a previous director of my division. Aldrich turned a page. Dumbledore was notified of the rediscovery in 1944. The 1945 meeting was his follow-up. She looked at Harry. He had 36 years between discovering your mother's bloodline and the night your parents died. 36 years to engineer the situation. The number landed in the room and sat there. 36 years. Harry had been alive for 11. Tell me about the bloodline, Harry said. Aldrich turned to a different section of her case, and this time what she produced was a genealogical chart, a large one, folded into quarters, that when unfolded covered most of the table beside the bed. She flattened it with her palms and turned it toward Harry. It was a family tree. Old and elaborate, stretching back centuries, with names in fading ink and connecting lines that branched and crossed with the complexity of something that had been growing for a very long time. Harry's eyes went to the bottom, where the most recent names were, and found Lily Evans, his mother, in the last generation. Connected upward. And upward again. And further up, through names he didn't recognize, through gaps and distances, back through 3 centuries to a name at the top that he did recognize. Everyone who'd had a wizarding history education recognized it. Ignotus Peverell, Harry said. Your mother was the last direct line descendant of Ignotus Peverell, Aldrich said. Keeper of the Third Hallow. The line was believed to have ended in the 16th century when the last known descendant died without recorded issue. What Dumbledore discovered in 1944 was that the line had not ended, it had gone underground. A daughter, unrecorded in the main genealogies, had survived and married into a Muggle family. Her magical ability was suppressed, as sometimes happens. Her descendants were Muggle for several generations. A pause. Until Lily. Harry looked at the chart. At the line running from the top of it to his mother's name, and from his mother's name to his own, the only thing written below hers, in handwriting that wasn't the chart's original ink but an addition, recent, careful. Harry James Potter. The Peverell line, Hermione said quietly. Harry, the Peverells are supposed to be the original owners of the Deathly Hallows, Harry said. Yes. He looked at the chart. What does that mean? Practically. What does descending from that line actually do? In isolation, not much beyond elevated magical capacity, Aldrich said. The Peverell line runs warm in most of its known branches. Powerful, yes. Unusual, yes. But not, she paused, not terminus point powerful, to use Dumbledore's phrase. So what makes me different? The intersection, Aldrich said. She turned to the second part of the chart, which tracked Harry's paternal line. The Potter family is also not what it appears in most public genealogies. The standard record shows them as a prominent but unremarkable pure-blood line. The legacy records tell a different story. She indicated a section midway up the paternal chart. The Potters carry a recessive bloodline marker from a different Peverell descendant. Antioch's line. Different branch entirely, believed extinct a century earlier. She looked up. Your parents were the first intersection of 2 separate Peverell descendant lines in 300 years. The room was exceptionally quiet. He arranged it, Harry said. Not with heat. With the same flat precision of someone reading coordinates from a map. He found the last 2 living Peverell descendants. In different bloodlines. He arranged for them to meet and fall in love and have a child. He looked at Aldrich. Tell me what he did. Specifically. How does a man arrange that someone meets someone else? Aldrich reached into her case again. This time what she produced were copies, ministry-certified copies, she explained, of documents that had been in the sealed file. She spread them on the table. Letters. Memos. Schedules. Harry leaned forward and read. It took him 20 minutes to read through the documents, because there were many of them. Hermione read over his shoulder at twice his speed and had begun making notes before he was halfway through. Ron read more slowly, moving his lips slightly on the more complex phrasing, and his face went through a series of expressions that began at disbelief and ended somewhere past outrage. The documents were meticulous. They were the records of a man who thought in systems, who planned in decades, who looked at two people and saw not individuals but components. There were references to orchestrated meetings, a Quidditch match arranged so that James Potter would be assigned a particular seat, a library booking manipulated so that Lily Evans would be studying in a specific alcove, a dormitory assignment at Hogwarts managed so that Lily's closest friend in 6th year would be someone connected to James's social circle. None of it was coercive. That was what made it so difficult to hold. No one had been forced. James and Lily had fallen in love freely, genuinely, with full feeling and no knowledge of the invisible track they'd been placed on. The love was real. The engineering that positioned them was real. Both things were true simultaneously. He made them fall in love, Ron said, slowly. He created conditions, Harry said. He didn't make them do anything. He looked at the documents. That's the part that's hardest, isn't it? Because they loved each other. That was real. I know it was real, everyone who knew them says it was the most real thing about them. And it was also arranged. The love wasn't arranged, Hermione said. The meeting was. Is there a difference? Yes, she said firmly. There is. Because if they'd met any other way, they might still have fallen in love. People fall in love. The meeting being arranged doesn't make the love less genuine. A pause. It makes the person who arranged it a manipulative. It makes what Dumbledore did still wrong. But your parents loved each other. That part is entirely theirs. Harry looked at the chart. At his mother's name and his father's name and the line connecting them and then his own name below. All right, he said. All right. He set the documents down. What's the full scope? You said this started in 1945. What did he actually do across 52 years? Aldrich had clearly been waiting for this question. She produced the final document in her case. It was a summary, prepared by her own department, of everything the unsealed files contained. She set it in front of Harry without ceremony. We are calling it internally the Convergence Program, she said. From 1945 to 1997, which is the latest document in the sealed files, Albus Dumbledore conducted what amounts to a systematic, multigenerational eugenics program. The word eugenics is specific and intentional. The goal was to engineer, through bloodline intersection and controlled environmental factors, a magical individual with the capacity to terminate the prophesied conflict with Voldemort. She paused. The program involved 12 separate families across 4 generations. It involved the suppression of 3 different bloodline records in ministry files. It involved the manipulation of at least 8 significant life events across the lives of people who had no knowledge they were being managed. She looked at Harry. And it involved the birth of 1 child, and the subsequent 11 years of memory modification, magical suppression, and deliberate isolation of that child, to ensure that the weapon arrived in the condition the program required. No one spoke. Harry picked up the summary document. He read the first page. Then he set it down face down on the bed. He did not read further. Not because he couldn't handle it, his face throughout had remained steady, focused, held, but because he had understood the shape of it and reading the details right now would not change the shape. 12 families, Hermione said quietly. She had continued reading the summary while Harry set it down. Harry, there are other people. Other people whose lives were arranged by this. People who have no idea. I know, Harry said. They'll need to know too. The investigation will, Croaker began. The investigation will tell them, yes, Harry said. He paused, and for the first time in 3 days the steadiness wavered slightly, not dramatically but genuinely, like a flame in a draft. I'm just noting that I'm not the only one. That this wasn't only about me. He didn't just do this to me. He looked at the window. The lake was visible from here, silver grey and enormous in the Scottish afternoon. He did this to everyone he thought he could use. Yes, Aldrich said. Simply. Honestly. Harry nodded. One small, definite nod. Right, he said. Then the investigation needs to be bigger than just me. He looked at Croker. All 12 families. Not just my case. All of them. The Wisengamot Oversight Committee will need to, then tell them, Harry said. I want all 12 families. McGonagall came to the hospital wing that afternoon with a face like January and sat in her chair beside Harry's bed without speaking for a full minute. Harry let her have the minute. He'd learned in the past 3 days that Minerva McGonagall processed difficult things through a period of fierce silence, after which she acted with total conviction. When the minute was up, she said, Albus came to my office this morning. What did he say? He said the convergence program, he knows that's what the department is calling it, was the most difficult decision of his life. He said he has spent every day since making it questioning it. He said, she paused, and something in her jaw worked, he said he believes it was necessary. That without a weapon of sufficient magnitude, Voldemort would have won. That he was not wrong about the goal, only, possibly, about the means. The means, Harry said. Yes. The means being me. And my parents. And 11 other families. Yes. Harry looked at the chart, which Aldrich had left with him and which was now folded on the nightstand. What did you say? McGonagall was quiet for a moment. I told him that the fact that the end might be justified does not give anyone the right to engineer other people's lives as the means toward it. That people are not instruments. That a man who has spent 52 years treating people as instruments has no standing to appeal to the concept of necessity. Another pause. And I told him that he should prepare a thorough legal representation for Friday, because Amelia Bones is not interested in philosophical justifications. Good, Harry said. Harry. Her voice changed on his name, it was the first time she'd used it without the Potter. He noticed. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. When have I not, he said, with a directness that almost made her smile. How are you? She asked. Not in the clinical sense. Not what are your symptoms, not how is your magical core, not how is the investigation progressing. How are you? Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the chart on the nightstand. He looked at the hospital wing, the white walls and the long windows and the bed standing empty in rows. He thought about the answer honestly, the way she'd asked. I'm angry, he said. But the anger is, he searched for the word, clean. Does that make sense? It's not the kind of anger that makes you stupid. It's the kind that makes you very clear about what you're looking at. Yes, she said. I understand that kind. And he paused again, I think I'm sad about my parents. About the real thing of it. Not the convenient version where they died heroically and that's the end of the story. The actual thing where two real people were put on a track by someone else and fell in love on it and died on it and never knew why they were really there. He looked at his hands. James didn't know. Dumbledore told me. James had no idea. McGonagall's expression did something complex. No, she said quietly. James didn't know. Did you know any of it? No. The word was absolute and immediate and he believed it. I knew that Dumbledore had reasons for everything he did. I assumed they were good reasons, informed by wisdom I didn't have access to. That is, she stopped, that is something I will spend a long time thinking about. What I was assuming, and why, and what it cost other people. They sat for a moment with that. Sirius is on Friday, Harry said. Yes. She straightened. The Ministry is sending a team to Azkaban tomorrow. Bones has arranged for a healer to accompany them. He's been in there for, she paused, for nearly 10 years. Will he be? I don't know, she said honestly. Azkaban is not, another pause, I don't know what 10 years there does to a person. He was in his late 20s when he went in. She looked at Harry. He loved you very much. Whatever 10 years there has done, that is not the kind of thing that leaves. Harry nodded. He looked at the window. At the lake. At the grounds going gold in the late afternoon sun, the castle's shadow long across the grass. McGonagall, he said. Yes. Thank you. For coming to get me when Pomfrey called. You could have gone to Dumbledore first. You could have, there are 100 ways that first morning could have gone differently if you'd made different choices. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You are my student. You are in my house. Whatever else has been true in 50 years of my career, those facts were always going to come first. Harry looked at her. He trusted you too, he said. Dumbledore. You were his person. That cost you something too, finding this out. Yes, she said. It did. I'm sorry about that part, he said. Not the finding out. The cost. She looked at him for a long moment over her sharp, fine-boned face, looked at him with the expression of someone who has just been offered something unexpected and is deciding how to receive it. Thank you, she said finally. Quietly. Thursday evening brought Ron to Harry's bedside with a face that had been building towards something all day. Harry had watched it building, had clocked the way Ron had been sitting slightly away from his usual spot, the way he'd been quieter during the day's meetings, the way he'd looked at his hands twice while Aldrich was speaking with the particular expression of someone whose hands remind them of something uncomfortable. When Hermione had gone to get dinner and it was just the two of them, Ron said, I have to tell you something. Okay, Harry said. My mom. Ron looked at his own hands. I've been thinking about the documents. The 12 families. The orchestrated meetings and the arranged circumstances. He looked up. Harry, my mum has talked, not often, but a few times, about how she first met my dad. She always tells it the same way, which I never thought was weird because it's just a story people tell. But she says they met at a Quidditch match. That she'd been given a ticket by someone at the ministry. That she'd always meant to thank the person but never found out who it was. Harry was very still. I'm not saying, Ron started. How old is your mum? Harry asked. Same year as my dad. So she'd have been, it would have been 1970. 1971, that's 30 years into the program, Harry said. Right in the middle. Ron's jaw was tight. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it means anything. My parents love each other. There, he stopped. Whatever else is true, they love each other. I know they do, Harry said. That's separate. The love is separate. But they might be on that list, Ron said. The 12 families. Maybe. Which means I might be on that list. He said it quietly. Me being your friend might not have been, he stopped himself. No. That's mad. That's taking it too far. We met on the train. We chose each other on the train. He looked at Harry. That was us. That was us, Harry agreed. But my family might be part of something bigger. Yes. Harry looked at his friend, at the red hair and the freckles and the face that had been steadily beside his since September 1st, through everything. Ron. If your family's on the list, that's something your family needs to know. It's not something you need to feel responsible for or sorry about. You didn't do anything. I know. Ron looked at his hands again. A breath, I want to know. I want to know if we were put together or if we chose. We chose, Harry said. The train. The compartment. That was us. Yeah. Ron looked up. Some of the tightness had gone out of his face, not all of it but enough. Yeah, okay. But I want you to look at the list when Aldrich releases the full 12 families, Harry said. I want you to know. Whatever the answer is. Yeah. Ron exhaled. Yeah, I will. Hermione came back with a tray of food and the slightly harassed look she got when the dinner arrangements didn't match what she'd requested, and sat down and looked between them and said, "What did I miss?" "Nothing," Ron said. Harry was just being decent. "He usually is," Hermione said, with the matter-of-fact fondness of someone stating a known fact, and passed Harry his soup. Friday morning. Harry woke up at 6, which was becoming his new normal. The limiters coming off seemed to have affected his sleep schedule along with everything else, his body and magic both more alert and requiring less rest. He washed, dressed in his school robes, and sat by the window to watch the sun come up over the lake. At 7:45, McGonagall came to tell him that Sirius Black had arrived at St. Mungo's overnight. Not Azkaban. Harry said. Bones decided Azkaban was not a suitable location for the interview. He was transported directly to the secure wing at St. Mungo's. She paused. He's been, another pause, the healers say he's coherent. That's the word they used. Coherent. Harry heard what was between the lines of that. What else? He is physically compromised. 10 years in Azkaban, she didn't finish that sentence. The healers are working with him. He's been asking about you since he arrived. What has he been asking? Whether you're all right, McGonagall said. Just that. Over and over, apparently, since they brought him in. Whether you're all right. Harry pressed his lips together. Looked at the window. Looked back. Can I see him today? Bones has scheduled the interview for 10 o'clock. She's agreed to allow you to be present for the last 30 minutes, after the formal proceedings. McGonagall looked at him. Harry, prepare yourself for, I know, he said. I know it won't be the same as, he stopped, because what he'd been about to say was as him, meaning the Sirius of the fragments, the Sirius in the echo of the sediment around the third memory charm, the Sirius in the warmth of being held at 18 months old. I know it'll be different, he said instead. I'll be ready. All right. She looked at him for a moment. And Dumbledore will be present at the beginning of the proceedings. He's been summoned to give his original testimony. Bones wants it on record and under veritaserum. Harry nodded. Good. You won't be in the room for that part. I know. He paused. Will you tell me what he says? Yes, she said. I'll tell you everything. She left him at the window. He turned back to the lake, to the flat, early morning silver of it, to the way the forbidden forest held its shape in the mist at the boundary of the grounds. He thought about Sirius Black asking whether he was all right. Over and over. With 10 years of Azkaban in him, still asking about Harry first. He thought about a man who had held him at 18 months and spoken to him in a fragment so emotional that even 67 memory charms hadn't fully buried it. Who was still, apparently, through everything that Azkaban did to a person, asking the same question. Harry reached into his pocket and took out the genealogical chart. Unfolded it to the section that showed his family, the line from Ignotus Peverell down through the centuries to Lily Evans to Harry Potter. He looked at his own name at the bottom, written in recent ink, added to a chart that had been building toward him for 300 years. He thought about the word Dumbledore had used. Terminus point. The end of the line. The place where everything converges and stops. He folded the chart and put it away. He was not the end of anyone's line. He was the beginning of his own. The lake was brightening as the sun got properly up, and the grounds were beginning to come alive with the first students of the morning cutting across the grass toward the greenhouses, and somewhere in the castle a door opened and the sound of 100 children's voices starting another ordinary Friday came through the stone walls with the comfortable, alive certainty of something that goes on regardless. Harry Potter watched the morning come in and waited, with perfect patience, for 10 o'clock. At 10:29, a ministry official with a lime green badge opened the door of the secure conference room at St. Mungo's and nodded at Harry, who had been sitting in the corridor with Hermione and Ron for the past 45 minutes. McGonagall had been inside. Bones had been inside. The formal proceedings had been running, and Harry had been outside, and he'd been fine with that, and now the door was open. He went in. Sirius Black was sitting in a chair on the far side of a table, and the first thing Harry registered was not what he looked like but what he felt like in the room, the way a fire feels when it's been burning low for a very long time and still has heat in it. He was thin in the way that suggested a different body underneath, a body that had been substantial once and remembered it. His hair was long and tangled and his eyes were grey and very sharp, and the moment Harry came through the door they found him immediately and did not move. Harry crossed the room. He pulled out the chair opposite Sirius and sat down and looked at his godfather across the table. Sirius opened his mouth and then closed it again. He swallowed. He tried once more. What came out was barely above a breath. "You look like James," he said. "Except the eyes." A pause. "Lily's eyes." "I know," Harry said. "Are you all right?" Sirius said. "They told me, Bones told me some of what, are you all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "The memory charms, the limiters are off," Harry said. Yes. I'm all right." He looked at Sirius steadily. "Are you all right?" Sirius let out a short, startled sound that took a moment to identify as something that was trying to be a laugh. "I've been better," he said. His voice was rougher than it should have been, with the particular rasp of someone who hasn't had occasion to speak much. "I've been considerably better." He looked at Harry. Just looked at him. With the focused, hungry attention of someone who has spent 10 years with a memory and is now comparing it to the real thing. "I used to talk to you," he said. After Godric's Hollow. Before he stopped. "You won't remember. You were too small." "Croaker found fragments," Harry said. "In the sediment around the charms. Your name was in one of them." He paused. The emotional register of the surrounding memory was significant, apparently. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I told you about your parents every day. Every day that I had you. I was terrified you'd forget them before you were old enough to." He stopped. "And then I was in Azkaban, and you were with muggles who didn't know anything, and I thought," his jaw worked. "I thought at least you had the memories." "You didn't know what he'd done," Harry said. It wasn't absolution. Harry wasn't in the business of offering absolution for things that weren't his to absolve. But it was clarity, and he gave it cleanly. "You couldn't have known. I should have fought harder. Before they took me. I should have." "You were 22 years old," Harry said. "And your best friends were dead and your other best friend had apparently betrayed them and you were in shock." He looked at Sirius steadily. "You were 22. What were you supposed to do?" Sirius looked at him. The gray eyes were very intense and very tired, and underneath both of those things was something that was going to take a long time to name. "When did you get to be so?" He stopped. 11, Harry said. "I've been 11 the whole time." The almost laugh again, more successful this time. Sirius put a hand over his face and held it there for a moment. His hands were wrong, thinner than they should be, the skin with the particular transparency of someone who has not had enough sun for a very long time. Harry looked at those hands and said nothing about them. When Sirius put his hand down, his face was more composed, but his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. "The investigation," he said. "Bones told me the scope of it. The Convergence Program." He said the name like it tasted like metal. "Albus has been 52 years, Harry said. "God. A breath. Does he know I know?" "Is he knew this morning under Veritaserum," Harry said. "So yes, he knows everything the investigation knows." Sirius looked at the table. At his own hands. I loved your parents, he said. Both of them. Whatever Dumbledore arranged or engineered or planned, James and Lily were real. They were as real as anything I've ever known. He looked up. I need you to know that. I know, Harry said. I've known that since the beginning. He looked at Sirius. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Immediate. Absolute. Tell me about them, Harry said. Tell me everything you remember. Everything you told me when I was small, everything that got taken, just tell me again. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. The expression on his face went through several things, landed somewhere that was painful and right simultaneously. We're going to need more time than this room allows, he said finally. I know, Harry said. I plan to come back. He paused. And then I plan to get you out of here. I don't have a place to, you're my godfather, Harry said. My legal guardian. The moment this investigation is done and you're formally cleared, and you will be formally cleared, Bones is going to make sure of that, you are my legal guardian. And then we sort out where we live from there. He met Sirius's eyes. Together. Sirius went very still. Not the still of someone calculating. The still of someone who has received something they stopped believing was possible a very long time ago. You're 11 years old, he said. Everyone keeps saying that, Harry said. It keeps being true. It keeps not being relevant. Sirius looked at him. And then something happened in his face, something that was more than the almost laugh and more than the bright eyes and more than 10 years of Azkaban trying to break a person, something cracked open that was genuine and enormous and alive. God, you're exactly like her, he said. Lily. You're exactly, tell me, Harry said. Tell me what she was like. And Sirius Black, who had been talking to a version of Harry that no longer existed, began again. Chapter 4, The Fire in the Blood. 3 days after the St. Mungo's meeting, Harry's magic started talking to the castle. Not literally, or not entirely literally, but that was the closest description he had for what was happening. He'd be walking a corridor and the torches would flare as he passed, not from any emotion or intention but simply from proximity, the way iron responds to a magnet. He'd sit in the hospital wing and the window latch would click open when he thought about air. Small things. Constant things. A conversation conducted entirely in gesture and response between something very old in the castle walls and something very new in Harry's blood. Oluwasian, when he described it during her Thursday follow-up, said, that's ambient attunement progressing at approximately 4 times the expected rate, and made a note with the brisk satisfaction of a scientist whose hypothesis is proving correct. Harry said, is that a problem? It's extraordinary, she said. Which is different from a problem. She looked at him over her silver instrument. Have you tried directing it? No. Try something small. Think of the candle on Pomfrey's desk. Not lighting it, just reaching. Harry looked at the candle. He didn't point at it or gesture or make any of the deliberate movements associated with magic. He simply extended his awareness toward it the way he'd extend his hand toward a door handle, easy and natural, and the candle lit. Oluwasian wrote 3 more things in her notebook. Wandless accession at 11 years old, she said, mostly to herself. Without the limiters this would have manifested at 4, perhaps 5. He'd have been lighting things across rooms since primary school. She looked up. No wonder Dumbledore was worried. He should have thought of that before he built someone he was afraid of, Harry said. McGonagall discharged him from the hospital wing on Saturday morning, 1 week after the scan. She did it with the clinical efficiency she applied to all administrative matters and the complete failure to be clinical that her eyes produced when she handed him his bag and watched him sling it over his shoulder. Your dormitory has been prepared for your return, she said. I've spoken to the other boys. They know that whatever questions they have should be directed to me and not to you. They'll ask anyway, Harry said. Yes, she agreed. They will. Neville has apparently made them all swear not to before letting any of them sleep the last 4 nights, which has worked with variable success. A small pause. Mr. Longbottom has also left your share of the breakfast pastries in a spelled box by your bed each morning. He said, and I am quoting directly, that you'd probably not been getting decent food in hospital. Harry smiled. The smile had more in it than just the sentiment. Neville Longbottom had been a quiet presence in Harry's Hogwarts experience thus far, kind and nervous and considerably more capable than he let himself believe, and the image of him standing guard over a spelled box of pastries for 4 mornings running was one of the most straightforwardly good things Harry had encountered in recent days. I'll thank him, Harry said. See that you do. She walked with him to the corridor. The investigation's next formal session is Wednesday. Bones has requested your presence. The Wizengamot Oversight Committee is convening to assess the scope of the formal charges. She paused at the top of the stairs. Dumbledore has retained a Wizengamot advocate. Of course he has, Harry said. The advocate's position is, as I understand it, that the memory charms constitute a series of individual actions rather than a systematic program, and should be assessed individually rather than collectively. Which would significantly reduce the legal gravity of each act. But Aldrich's files established the convergence program, Harry said immediately. The systematic intent. You can't separate the actions from the program when the program is documented by the architect of it in his own handwriting. That is also Bones's position, McGonagall said, with a dryness that wasn't quite a smile. I thought you should know what argument is being made so you can think about it before Wednesday. Thank you, Harry said. He started down the stairs and then stopped 1 step down and looked back up at her. Who is the advocate? Lucius Malfoy, she said. Harry took that in. Malfoy. Draco Malfoy's father. Yes. So Dumbledore's legal defense is being managed by a man who until 18 months ago was openly supportive of Voldemort's agenda. Harry looked at her. That's interesting. It is, isn't it, McGonagall said, and this time the dryness had a different quality to it, the quality of someone who has noticed the same thing and drawn the same conclusion. One does wonder what the arrangement between them looks like. One does, Harry agreed. He went down the stairs. Gryffindor Tower was exactly the same and completely different, the way places feel when you've changed in them during an absence. The common room was full of Sunday morning noise, chess games, someone's exploding snap deck going off repeatedly near the fire, 3 fifth years spread across a table with their OWL revision. It all stopped when Harry came through the portrait hole. He stood in the sudden quiet and looked at 40-something faces looking back at him, and said, "Hello. I'm fine. Yes, it's true. No, I'm not going to explain all of it right now. Yes, there'll probably be news coverage, don't believe everything it says." He looked around the room. Who's got chess going? I want to play. The noise came back. Ron materialized at his shoulder, grinning. Smooth, he said. I've been lying in a hospital bed for a week. I've been practicing my entrance. Harry set his bag down and dropped into an armchair by the fire, and the common room settled around him like water closing over a stone, the particular settling of a group of people who have decided that the best way to treat someone is to treat them normally. He found that he was grateful for it in a way he hadn't expected to be. Neville appeared from the direction of the dormitory stairs carrying the spelled box of pastries with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing what to say and has decided to bypass speech entirely in favor of food. Thanks, Neville, Harry said, taking the box. Seriously. Neville went very slightly pink and said, "Oh, it was nothing," with the tone of someone who has correctly identified that it was something. He sat in the nearest chair and said, with the careful delicacy of someone who has also been thinking about this for several days, "Are you actually all right?" Not because I'm going to ask about anything. Just. Are you?" Harry looked at him. At the round, earnest face and the hands clasped over his knees and the complete absence of artifice. "Yeah," he said. "I actually am." Good, said Neville, and looked at the fire, and that was all he needed to say. By Monday, the prophet had the story. Not the full story. Bones had a containment order on the specifics of the convergence program until Wednesday's Wisengamot session, but enough. Hogwarts healer finds memory charms on the boy who lived ran above the fold on the front page, with a photograph of Harry from the Hogwarts welcome feast that someone had clearly sold to the paper, and a story that was accurate in its broad strokes and wildly speculative in its details. Harry read it at breakfast, ate his eggs, and handed it to Hermione, who read it with increasing speed and decreasing facial approval. They've called it a medical curiosity, she said. A medical curiosity. Someone has been systematically erasing a child's memories for 11 years and the prophet is calling it a medical curiosity. They don't have the program yet, Harry said. Wait for Wednesday. They've also implied it might have been related to your scar. As if, she made a sound of frustration. As if the scar just spontaneously produced 67 memory charms. It's the prophet, Ron said, without looking up from his own breakfast. They once ran a story about a wizard who turned into a teapot. Standards aren't really the thing. Across the Great Hall, Draco Malfoy was reading the same paper. Harry noticed him because Malfoy had the paper held at an angle that was clearly not reading, he was watching Harry over the top of it. When Harry met his eyes, he didn't look away. He held the look for a moment with an expression that was hard to read at this distance, and then lowered the paper and went back to his breakfast. That was odd, Hermione said, who had also clocked it. His father's Dumbledore's advocate, Harry said. He probably knows more than the prophet does. Does that worry you? Harry considered that honestly. No, he said. Should it? Hermione looked at the Slytherin table for a moment. I think Malfoy is, I think he's in an interesting position, she said carefully. His father's involved, which means whatever happens Wednesday affects his family. He spent this year being hostile to you. And now the story is, considerably larger than a school rivalry. She paused. I'd watch him. Not because he's dangerous. Because I think he's calculating something and I'd like to know what. So would I, Harry said. Monday afternoon brought defense against the dark arts with a substitute. Quirrell's replacement was a temporary arrangement, a ministry liaison named Clearwater who taught entirely from a textbook and had the teaching presence of someone reading the telephone directory. Harry sat at the back and used the lesson to work through the Wisengamot procedures Bones had sent him, which was considerably more useful. He was halfway through the third document when he became aware of Malfoy sitting down beside him. This required some unpacking. Malfoy had not voluntarily sat near Harry Potter at any point in the past 10 months. He had sat across rooms from him, at the opposite end of tables from him, and had managed considerable dramatic presence at the other end of various corridors. He had not sat next to him in class. Harry looked up from his document. Malfoy was looking at the substitute teacher with the expression of someone performing attention. Your father's representing Dumbledore, Harry said quietly. Yes, Malfoy said. Is that an arrangement you agree with? A small pause. I don't have opinions on my father's professional decisions, Malfoy said, which was not an answer. Everyone has opinions, Harry said. They just don't always say them. Malfoy turned slightly, enough to look at Harry without making it obvious to the rest of the room. His expression was the carefully controlled neutrality of someone who has been taught from birth that faces are political surfaces. The document they're calling the convergence program, he said, very quietly. My father has seen the full unsealed file. I know, Harry said. So do I, Malfoy said. Harry waited. Malfoy looked back at the teacher. My great-grandmother is in it, he said. On one of the adjacent charts. A second-generation relative of one of the 12 families. He paused. It doesn't affect my family directly. But it means I've read it. Another pause. All of it. And? Harry said. Malfoy's jaw shifted slightly. My father's strategy is to isolate each memory charm as an individual act of care. To argue that Dumbledore's intentions, being demonstrably beneficial to the wizarding world's survival, mitigate the means employed. He looked at Harry. It won't work. Harry looked at him steadily. Why are you telling me this? Malfoy was quiet for a moment. It was a different quality of quiet than his usual, not the composing of a cutting remark, but something more like genuine uncertainty making contact with genuine decision. Because, he said finally, the document is about what people do when they've decided their goals are important enough to override what other people are. He looked at the textbook in front of him without seeing it. I was raised to think that was acceptable. That, he stopped. Started again. It's a different thing when you read it laid out across 52 years. Yes, Harry said. It is. They looked at the substitute teacher for a moment in mutual silence. I'm not your ally, Malfoy said quietly. Don't mistake this for that. I won't, Harry said. But I'm going to remember this conversation. Malfoy picked up his quill and began taking notes from the textbook. So will I, he said, and that was the end of it. Harry went back to the Wizengamot documents. Tuesday happened in 2 parts, divided by a conversation. The first part was a session with Oluwasian, who had new data. She spread it on the table in the empty classroom McGonagall had given her for the day's work, a second-floor room with good light and nothing breakable on the shelves, which had been a deliberate choice, and walked Harry through what the post-limiter measurements were showing. Your core output has stabilized at a level I'm going to call 13+, she said. The plus is because I genuinely can't give you a precise number. The upper end of my instrument's range is level 12, and you are, above that. She said it simply, without drama. For context, Dumbledore himself reads at level 11.7 on a good day. Merlin, historically, is estimated at around 12 to 12.5. Harry took this in without performance. He'd had a week to get used to the idea of his own magnitude, which had paradoxically made it easier to hold without it becoming strange. It was just what he was. He'd been this all along. What does it mean practically, he asked. Not in terms of classification. In terms of what I can do. In terms of raw power, almost anything you attempt will work, she said. At this stage your limitation is knowledge and precision, not capacity. You could probably bring this entire castle down right now, but you couldn't necessarily rebuild a specific stone without studying construction transfiguration. She looked at him. You need education. Urgently and seriously. The gap between what you're capable of and what you've been taught is vast. I know, Harry said. I'd like to propose something, she said. It's outside my usual scope, but I know people. Researchers, practitioners, masters in specific disciplines. People who would, she paused, who would be interested to work with you. If you're interested in that. I want to learn everything, Harry said. That's ambitious, she said. I know, he said. Start with the most important things. She looked at him for a moment. Protective magic, she said. Wards and shields and constructs. The kind that actually matter when something's trying to kill you. A pause. And a clemency. You've had 67 things done to your mind. You should learn to make your mind your own. Yes to both, Harry said immediately. She made a note. I have a name for a clemency. A woman named Ravenscroft. She's the best I know. She paused. She's also, to be candid, quite alarming. As a person. I can handle alarming, Harry said. Yes, Oluwasian said, looking at him. I imagine you can. The second part of Tuesday was the conversation, which happened at 7 in the evening in the empty classroom after Oluwasian had gone and Harry was gathering the day's documents into his bag. He'd known McGonagall was waiting, he'd heard her footsteps in the corridor for the last 10 minutes, the particular quality of footsteps that aren't passing through. She came in when he didn't emerge. I have something to tell you, she said, which was how she opened conversations that were going to require some landing space. Dumbledore? Harry said. No. She sat. Your aunt and uncle have been contacted by the ministry. Specifically by Bones's office, regarding their role as your guardians and the circumstances of your placement with them. Harry went still. What did they say? Your aunt confirmed that Dumbledore visited the house on 3 occasions after your placement there. Each visit was brief. She remembers the visits but has no clear memory of what was discussed. McGonagall's voice stayed measured. Which is consistent with post-visit obliviation. He obliviated my aunt, Harry said. It appears so. 3 times. Harry set his bag down. He stood in the middle of the empty classroom and thought about his aunt, about her pinched face and the way she watched him from across rooms, the wary discomfort she'd always had around him that he'd always attributed to fear of magic. He thought about the visits she remembered and didn't remember. About the woman who had had her memory rewritten 3 times by the most powerful wizard of the age and had spent 9 years living with the consequence, a nephew she'd been told to manage and hadn't been told how, a situation she'd been placed in and then had the context removed from. He did not feel fond of Petunia Dursley. 9 years of lived experience made fondness an ambitious project. But he felt something that was cleaner than what he usually felt about her, which was a kind of automatic flinching. What he felt now was something closer to understanding of how it had happened, which was different from forgiving it but was its own kind of release. She didn't have all the information either, he said. No, McGonagall said. She didn't. He managed everyone. Harry picked his bag back up. Everyone he needed to stay in particular positions. He managed them. My aunt. My godfather. My parents. Me. He looked at McGonagall. Everyone except you. She raised her eyebrows slightly. He didn't manage you, Harry said. You saw the scan and you called Bones. You didn't go to him first. Why not? McGonagall was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she said honestly. In the moment I read that scroll, something in me simply knew that going to Albus first would be, she paused. That it would become something Albus managed. And this, she looked at him steadily, this needed to be something that was managed by the right people. Which were Pomfrey and Bones, Harry said. And me. Yes, she said. And you. Harry nodded. I'm glad, he said simply. I'm glad it was you in that hospital at 2 in the morning. She stood. She smoothed her robes, a habitual gesture, a settling gesture. Wednesday, she said. Are you ready? Yes, he said. Wednesday morning. Harry was ready at 7. He ate breakfast early, before the hall filled. He was wearing his school robes and had added the Gryffindor tie, which he'd straightened twice because Hermione kept looking at it, and he had his Wisengamot documents in his bag and a new edition, 3 sheets of parchment on which he'd written, in his own words, a statement. Not for Bones, she had everything she needed. For himself. The act of writing it had clarified something. He kept it in his inner pocket. Hermione arrived at 7:15 with her own folder, which was 3 times the thickness of Harry's and color-coded with what appeared to be a proprietary system of her own devising. I've cross-referenced Aldrich's genealogical data with the existing Hogwarts bloodline records, she said, sitting down across from him and spreading documents with the efficiency of someone who has been awake since 5. There are 4 students currently at Hogwarts who appear in the adjacent family charts. Not directly in the 12, but close enough to warrant, Hermione, Harry said. She looked up. After, he said gently. Eat something. She looked at her documents. Then at Harry. Then she put them away and took a piece of toast and ate it with the slightly impatient energy of someone eating as a concession to biology. Ron appeared 10 minutes later, looked at them both, looked at the table, and said, right. Big day. He sat down, loaded his plate, and said, "Malfoy's watching you again," without turning around. "I know," Harry said. "He's been at it since yesterday. Whatever you said to him in defense." "I know," Harry said again. Ron looked at him. "Should I be concerned?" "No," Harry said. "He's thinking about something. Let him think." At 8:30, Bones arrived at Hogwarts with 2 senior DMLE officers and a Wizengamot recorder. She found Harry in the entrance hall and they walked to the appointed conference room, a transfigured space in the 3rd floor that McGonagall had prepared, with the easy, forward momentum of 2 people who have already agreed on the direction. "Dumbledore's advocate submitted an amended position this morning," Bones said, without preamble, as they walked. "I know," Harry said. "Isolating the individual acts. You've been briefed." "I briefed myself," he said. "I'd like to make a statement before the formal session opens." Bones looked at him sideways. "The committee wasn't expecting, I know. I'm asking." She considered for approximately 3 seconds. 5 minutes, she said. "Before we open the formal record." "I only need 3, Harry said. The conference room had 6 chairs arranged around a long table. Bones's 2 officers took the far end. The Wizengamot recorder, a thin, precise woman with quick quotes quill already loaded, took a seat off to the side. Dumbledore was already present, seated at the table with his advocate. Lucius Malfoy was exactly what Harry had expected, tall, carefully assembled, with the look of someone who has been managing impressions since birth and has become genuinely brilliant at it. He looked at Harry when Harry came in and his expression was the blank, polished neutrality of professional opposition. Harry looked back with nothing in particular. Dumbledore met Harry's eyes when Harry sat down. His face was older than it had been a week ago, which was remarkable given how old it had been. He was not a man who showed stress easily, but it was showing now, in the set of his shoulders and the quality of the light in his eyes, which was still considerable but had changed key slightly, the way a piece of music changes key and is recognizably the same and completely different. Harry held his gaze for a moment. Not aggressively. Not with the pointed quality of trying to communicate something. He just met the look and let it be what it was, 2 people sitting across a table, one of whom had shaped the other's entire life, and the other of whom had decided to shape his own from here. Then he looked at Bones, and she nodded, and Harry took out his 3 sheets of parchment. "I want to say something before we begin," he said, to the room and specifically to the recorder. "I want it on the record." The quick quotes quill hovered. Harry looked at his statement. He'd written it in plain language because the thing he wanted to say was plain. He read it without performance, with the same steady delivery he'd been using all week, not for effect, just because it was the most honest register. "My name is Harry James Potter. I'm 11 years old. Approximately 1 week ago, a medical professional running a routine diagnostic scan found 67 memory charms in my magical architecture, applied systematically over 10 years without my knowledge or consent. The investigation that followed has established that those charms were part of a 52-year program designed to engineer my existence and manage my development toward a predetermined outcome. I did not consent to any of this. I was not capable of consenting to most of it. Neither were the 11 other families involved, most of whom do not yet know they were involved." He looked up. The room was very quiet. "I'm not asking for sympathy," he said. "I don't need it. I'm asking for something specific, that the legal assessment of this program treats it as what it is, a systematic and intentional course of action spanning 5 decades, and not as a collection of individual decisions that can be assessed in isolation. The document known as the Convergence Program, written in the architect's own hand, establishes intent. Intent makes it systematic. Systematic makes it a program. And programs have architects, not just participants." He set the statement down. "That's all I wanted to say." He folded the parchment. Tucked it back in his pocket. Lucius Malfoy was looking at him with an expression that had shifted fractionally from polished neutrality to something that was either recalibration or the precursor to recalibration. The recorder's quill was moving rapidly. Bones said, "Thank you, Mr. Potter. Let's begin." The session ran 4 hours. It was not exciting in the way that Harry had imagined formal legal proceedings might be exciting. It was precise and procedural and exhausting in the particular way that occurs when truth is being treated with the rigor it deserves, when every claim has to be documented, every document verified, every verification cross-referenced. Malfoy was, Harry had to acknowledge, very good. He mounted a careful, intelligent defense that isolated, characterized, and humanized each element of Dumbledore's actions with the skill of someone who understood that legal arguments are also emotional arguments. But Bones was better. She had a quality in procedural settings that Harry observed with genuine interest. She didn't argue against Malfoy so much as she built a structure that simply left no room for his arguments to stand. She presented the Convergence Program document. She presented Aldrich's genealogical analysis. She presented Aluwazian's technical assessment of the limiter architecture. She presented Croker's sediment fragment analysis with the names and dates and emotional registers all catalogued. She laid it all out in order, building something that had mass and substance and direction, and when Malfoy argued against individual components, Bones simply indicated how each component connected to the whole, and the whole was undeniable. Dumbledore spoke twice. Both times briefly, both times with the carefully chosen language of someone who has been advised to limit their exposure and finds the limitation difficult. The first time was to confirm the 23 memory charms he'd previously admitted to. The second time was in response to a direct question from the Oversight Committee chair about the Convergence Program document. He said, "I wrote that document in 1945. I was 34 years old. The theory I was developing at that time was ambitious. Some of what I committed to writing was theoretical speculation that I did not fully execute as described." The committee chair said, "The genealogical records suggest otherwise." Dumbledore said, "The genealogical records show correlations. Correlation and intent are not equivalent." Bones said, "The document establishes intent. The genealogical records establish execution. Together they establish a deliberate program." She looked at the committee chair. "The distinction the headmaster is attempting to draw does not exist in law." Dumbledore looked at his hands. Harry watched him throughout. He watched the old man's face move through the things it moved through, the moments of genuine pain, the moments of maintained dignity, the single moment near the end of hour 3 when Dumbledore looked up from his own hands and across the table at Harry, and his face did something that contained an entire conversation's worth of complexity in about 4 seconds. Harry held the look. Dumbledore looked away first. After the session, in the corridor outside, McGonagall found Harry sitting on a windowsill looking at the grounds. The afternoon had come in while they'd been inside, and the grounds were gold and green and enormous in the late May light. She sat beside him on the windowsill without comment. They sat together for a moment. "What happens now?" Harry asked. "The Oversight Committee reviews the formal submission," she said. "Based on today's session, they'll decide whether to escalate to full Wisengamot proceedings or resolve it at the committee level. Bones expects full proceedings." A pause. "The formal charges, if they're filed, will include violations of the Bodily Magical Integrity Act, the Magical Memory Autonomy Act, and a new charge that the Ministry legal team has been assembling based on the program's scope. They're calling it systemic magical manipulation of minors." "Good," Harry said. "It will take time," she said. "Weeks, probably. Bones says the process is the thing, it has to be done properly to hold." Harry nodded. He was looking at the Quidditch pitch, visible from this window, the hoop standing up against the sky. He'd been at Hogwarts for an entire year and hadn't flown in 3 weeks. The thought arrived with a simple, specific longing that had nothing to do with investigations or charges or genealogical charts. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes. When all of this is done, when the formal proceedings are finished and Sirius is cleared and the investigation closes, what happens to Dumbledore?" "Not legally. Actually. What happens to him?" McGonagall thought about this. He will likely retain his Order of Merlin, she said. He will likely lose the Wisengamot chief wardenship. He may lose the Hogwarts headmastership, depending on the committee's determinations. But he will not, she paused carefully, Dumbledore will never be destroyed in the public understanding. He has done too much genuine good across too many years. What will happen is that the good will be understood differently. In context. She looked at Harry. Which is, I think, the right outcome. The truth is complex. He is complex, Harry said. Yes. I don't hate him, Harry said, with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who has examined the question honestly. I want to. It would be simpler. But I don't. He looked at the Quidditch pitch. I think he believed every single thing he did was necessary. I think he would do it again. And I think that's actually worse than hating him, somehow. Knowing that. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. It is. I'm still going to make sure the investigation is complete, Harry said. All 12 families. All of it on record. Not because I want him destroyed. Because everyone deserves to know what was done to them. Yes, she said again. They do. They sat on the windowsill in the May afternoon with the castle around them and the grounds below them and the whole complicated weight of the week settling into something that was not yet resolution but was the shape of resolution coming. Then Harry said, I want to fly. McGonagall blinked. I beg your pardon. I want to fly. I've been inside for a week and I want to get on a broom and go very fast. He looked at her. Is that all right? Something happened in her face that was not quite a smile but was the structural precursor to one. I believe, she said, that is entirely in order. He was on the pitch 10 minutes later, alone in the late afternoon with a Nimbus 2000 that Madame Hooch kept for students without their own brooms, and the moment he left the ground it was like the first real breath of the week. Everything that had been processing and building and sitting still in him went outward, burned off in altitude and speed, the castle shrinking below him and the lake spreading silver to the south and the air up here cold and clean and not containing any investigation documents or genealogical charts or recordings of testimonies. He went fast. He went very fast. He flew the length of the pitch twice in a straight line and then spiraled up with the specific abandon of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a long time, and his magic, set free by the limiters and now fully his own, responded to the movement the way it had been responding to everything since Tuesday, eagerly, with a warmth that felt like recognition. He didn't notice Sirius until he was 50 feet up. The man was standing at the edge of the pitch in the grey tracksuit that the St. Mungo's healers had apparently decided was appropriate discharge clothing, with McGonagall beside him, both of them looking up. Bones had cleared Sirius's release to McGonagall's custody 2 hours ago. Harry knew this had been in motion but hadn't expected today. He pulled the broom into a dive and came down fast, pulling up at the last moment and landing in a controlled skid 5 feet from where Sirius stood. Sirius was watching him with an expression that was multiple things at once. Startled. Delighted. Stripped open the way strong feelings strip faces open when they arrive before any management can be applied. You fly like James, he said. Except, he shook his head. Faster. Considerably faster. The limiters, Harry said. Right. Sirius looked at the broom. At Harry. At the broom again. The limiters. He looked up at the sky where Harry had just been. James never went that fast. Dad wasn't there for the limiters coming off, Harry said simply. This is just what I am. Sirius looked at him. The late afternoon sun was doing something to the angles of his face that made him look more like the photographs Harry had seen, the young man in the pictures with James, laughing, the gap between that person and the man in front of him measurable in exactly 10 years of Azkaban. But the eyes were the same. Sharp and grey and entirely present. McGonagall tells me you've been managing this whole thing, Sirius said. Bones managed the investigation, Harry said. I just made sure it went in the right direction. That's managing it, Sirius said. Harry shrugged. He propped the broom against his shoulder and looked at his godfather. How are you feeling? Actually. Sirius made the almost laugh sound again. Every time you ask that it surprises me, he said. You ask it like you actually want to know. I do actually want to know, Harry said. I know. Sirius looked at the ground. At the pitch. At his own hands, which Harry had noticed he did frequently, as if periodically checking they were still his. I feel like I've been asleep for 10 years and am only partially awake. The healers tell me the Dementor effects will diminish over time. He looked up. I feel better than I did 6 days ago. That's a specific and genuine improvement. Good, Harry said. He looked at his godfather with the same direct, uncomplicated attention he'd been giving everything this week. We have things to talk about. About my parents. About all of it. I know. But not tonight, Harry said. Tonight, he looked at the castle, at the warm light in the windows, at the evening coming in quietly across the grounds. Tonight I think you should probably have dinner and sleep somewhere that isn't a secure wing. McGonagall has arranged a guest room, Sirius said. Good. Harry looked at him. Tomorrow we talk. Tomorrow we talk, Sirius agreed. They walked back toward the castle together, McGonagall ahead of them, giving them the space, and the evening settled around them with the ordinary, unremarkable kindness of Scottish May, and Harry noticed that his magic was doing the thing it did with the castle, the ambient attunement, the sense of the old magic in the walls registering in his peripheral awareness. And then he noticed something new, it was doing it with Sirius too. Something in the man's magical signature registered the same way, not with the mass and depth of the castle, but with the same quality of recognition. Old. Known. He didn't mention it. He filed it alongside everything else he was learning about what he was. He let it be curious and new and interesting, the way a path you haven't walked before is curious and interesting when you're walking it for the first time and the direction is entirely your own. The castle doors opened as they reached them, automatically, without Harry touching them, and warm light spilled out across the steps, and the sound of the evening meal drifted from below with the smell of bread and something with rosemary. Sirius stopped for 1 second at the threshold and stood in the warm light from inside, and his face did something that Harry recognized from the St. Mungo's room, that cracking open thing, that enormous and alive thing that 10 years of Azkaban hadn't succeeded in extinguishing. Harry walked in and turned back and waited. Sirius walked in after him. The door closed behind them. Right then, Sirius said, quietly. Just the two of them in the entrance hall for a moment. Show me where we eat. This way, Harry said, and led him forward. Chapter 5, The Wizengamot Moves. The full Wizengamot session was set for the second week of June. Bones sent the confirmation on a Thursday morning, via a ministry owl that arrived at breakfast with the kind of formal weight that official correspondence carries when it's been sealed with 3 different charms and a ministry crest. Harry opened it over his porridge, read it once, folded it, and put it in his inside pocket. Hermione, who had been watching him with the peripheral awareness she developed over the past 2 weeks of this, raised her eyebrows. Tuesday, Harry said. Full chamber. 52 Wizengamot members. That's the entire active roster, Hermione said. Yes. They don't convene the full chamber for minor matters, she said. No, Harry agreed. They don't. Ron was eating toast with the focused energy he brought to meals when he was managing anxiety through food. He'd been quieter than usual for the past 3 days, since Aldrich had released the full list of the 12 families and the Weasley name had appeared in the 4th tier, not directly, but adjacently, a second-generation connection through Molly Weasley's maternal line that confirmed what Ron had suspected. He hadn't talked about it much. He'd sat with it and eaten steadily and occasionally made jokes that were slightly more pointed than usual, and Harry had let him process it at the pace he needed. Your mum knows? Harry had asked, 2 days ago. Dad's telling her this weekend, Ron had said. He found out from the ministry before we did, apparently. Bones's office notified the affected families. A pause. Mum doesn't know yet. How do you think she'll take it? Badly, Ron had said. Then, after a moment, not badly toward you. Badly in general. She'll need somewhere to put it, and then she'll be angry, and then she'll probably try to feed everyone involved because that's how she handles things that don't have obvious solutions. Harry had nodded. I'd be all right with being fed, he said. That had made Ron laugh, which had been the point. Now, Thursday morning, with the Wisingamot notice folded in his pocket and the last week of term spreading itself across the next 8 days, Harry looked at the Gryffindor table and then at the staff table and then out the high windows at the June morning coming in bright and clean over the grounds. I want to fly before we leave for London, he said. We don't leave until Monday, Hermione said. I know. I want to fly every day between now and then. He looked at his porridge. I want to remember what normal feels like. Before Tuesday. He flew Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Sirius joined him on Saturday. The man had been at Hogwarts for 10 days now, staying in the guest room McGonagall had arranged, spending his mornings with the healers who came from St. Mungo's to continue his treatment and his afternoons with Harry and his evenings in the library or the staff sitting room or occasionally in the hospital wing talking to Pomfrey, who had developed for him the specific brand of no-nonsense compassion she reserved for the cases that had been through something real. On Saturday, Sirius borrowed a school broom and they flew together for 2 hours without discussing anything of substance, just altitude and direction and the occasional shouted comment about technique, and Sirius was a genuinely excellent flyer, which surprised Harry until he thought about it and realized it shouldn't have. You played chaser, Harry said, when they'd come down and were sitting in the grass at the edge of the pitch. 7 years, 3 of them starting chaser, Sirius said. Your father was seeker. Best natural seeker I ever saw, until, he looked at Harry on the grass beside him. Until me? Harry said. I was going to be diplomatic and not say that. Don't be diplomatic, Harry said. I'm 11, not fragile. Sirius made the laugh sound, which was becoming more recognizable as an actual laugh the more time Harry spent with him. 10 days of sleep and food and St. Mungo's healers were doing visible work. He was still thin, still carried the marks of Azkaban in the quality of his stillness sometimes, in the way he occasionally startled at nothing. But he was becoming more solidly present each day, like a photograph developing, the image always there, the clarity arriving gradually. Your father would have loved watching you fly, Sirius said. Harry looked at the sky. Tell me something he used to do. Not a story. Just, a thing. A habit. He tapped his quill on his chin when he was thinking, Sirius said immediately. Always the left side. It drove his professors absolutely mad because the sound carried. A pause. He also had this thing where he'd apologize to inanimate objects if he bumped into them. Which is deeply embarrassing to admit about your best friend, but there it is. Harry felt something in his chest do something complicated. He'd been collecting these, the small particular things, the habits and mannerisms and specific human details that made the word father into something more dimensional than a headstone. Sirius was generous with them. He seemed to understand instinctively that Harry needed the texture of the real people and not only the legend. And my mum? Harry said. Your mother, Sirius said, leaning back on his elbows, used to read 3 books simultaneously, always in rotation, and she kept them stacked on her nightstand in a very specific order that no one else was allowed to touch. She also, he smiled, and it changed his face considerably, she could do this thing where she was telling you something completely innocuous and you would somehow arrive at the end of the conversation having agreed to do something you'd had absolutely no intention of doing when it started. She talked people into things. Not manipulatively. Just, she thought through the logic of a situation so clearly and explained it so well that by the time she was done the reasonable conclusion was usually hers. Sirius looked at Harry. I see that in you. You've only known me for 10 days. I've been watching you run this investigation for 10 days, Sirius said. You don't tell people what to do. You just make the right thing, so obviously the right thing that people find themselves doing it. He paused. That's Lily. That's entirely Lily. Harry was quiet for a moment. He'd carried these conversations with him all week, folded them into himself alongside everything else, the investigation documents, the Wisingamot procedures, Oluwasian's assessments. But this was different. This was the part that couldn't be documented or cross-referenced or submitted in evidence. This was just his. Sirius, he said. Yeah. When this is done, the Wisingamot, the formal proceedings, all of it, I want you to take me to Godric's Hollow. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Not immediately, it came after a breath, after something moved through him. Yeah. We'll go. Sunday was Hermione's day, which meant Sunday was a different kind of preparation. She'd been building something for 2 weeks, a comprehensive analytical brief on the Wisingamot proceedings, the relevant statutes, the precedent cases, the expected lines of argument from both Bones's team and Malfoy's advocacy. She'd requested and received, via McGonagall's connections, the full text of the Memory Autonomy Act of 1862, the Bodily Magical Integrity Act of 1879, and 4 related ministry instruments. She had read all of them. She had made notes in 4 colors. She spread everything across the table in the second-floor classroom and walked Harry through it with the focused, rapid energy of a lecturer who has spent considerable time ensuring her material is both accurate and comprehensible. The strongest part of Bones's case, she said, pointing to a section she'd marked in red, is the systematic intent argument. The Convergence Program document establishes that the memory charms weren't reactive, they weren't applied because something happened and needed to be addressed. They were applied proactively, as part of a design sequence. That's the distinction the Oversight Committee has already signaled they find compelling. What's the weakest part? Harry asked. The consent question around your parents, Hermione said, without hesitation. She'd clearly thought about this extensively. Dumbledore's advocate will argue that Lily Potter, having been informed and having made an informed choice, constitutes a form of consent by proxy. That she represented the family's interest in the matter. She looked at Harry. Which is, wrong, Harry said. Because James didn't consent. Because I didn't consent. Because Lily's consent to her own situation doesn't constitute consent on behalf of her child who hadn't been born yet. Exactly, Hermione said. And that's what Bones will argue. But Malfoy will push back on the retroactive application of consent frameworks to decisions made in wartime conditions by people who believed they were acting in the interest of survival. He'll try to, she paused, he'll try to make the Wizarding War the context that justifies everything. The idea that everything was permissible because the alternative was worse. And the counter? That the war doesn't suspend other people's right to know what's being done to them. That necessity is not a blank check. She looked at him steadily. And that the war ended 14 months ago, but the memory charms continued. The most recent one was 11 days before you came to Hogwarts. Voldemort was already gone. The war was over. There was no necessity anymore. Just ongoing management of an asset. The word asset sat between them for a moment. You're good at this, Harry said. I'm furious, Hermione said, with the precision of someone locating the correct word. It makes me thorough. They took the Fleur to London Monday afternoon, Harry, Hermione, Ron, McGonagall, and Sirius, who had been issued formal temporary liberty by Bones's office pending the outcome of Tuesday's proceedings. He was not, technically, free. He was provisionally released. The distinction mattered legally. The reality of him stepping out of a fireplace into the ministry atrium and straightening up and looking around at the gold statues and the fountain and the moving ceiling of magical messages with the expression of someone taking inventory of a place they'd last seen in a different life, that was something else. Harry stood beside him and said nothing. He let Sirius look. Different, Sirius said finally. Different how? The fountain. It wasn't there. He looked at the statue, the wizard and witch and centaur and goblin and house elf, arranged in that particular hierarchy. Something moved across his face. Still the same message, though. The magical is mightiest. He looked at it for a moment with an expression that contained both amusement and something sharper. Some things don't change. They were staying at a ministry-arranged accommodation, a secure flat in central London that Bones had organized, with 2 aura presences outside that were described as protective rather than custodial, which was a distinction Harry chose to believe for practical purposes. The flat was clean and impersonal and smelled of ministry-grade cleaning charms, and had the particular blankness of a space that has hosted many people briefly and absorbed none of them. Ron claimed the largest bedroom on the grounds that he was tallest, which Hermione contested on the grounds that height was not a valid allocation criterion, and while they were negotiating this with the specificity that only people who are genuinely comfortable together can achieve, Harry set his bag down in the remaining bedroom and sat on the bed and felt the day settle. Sirius appeared in the doorway. "You all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "Then, I've been all right for 2 weeks. At some point that stops being a notable state." Sirius leaned against the doorframe. "What does it feel like?" "Tomorrow." Harry thought about that. "Important," he said. "Not frightening. Important in the way that something that's been wrong for a long time finally getting addressed feels important. Not exciting. Just, necessary. You're not nervous?" "Should I be?" Sirius looked at him with the expression Harry was starting to recognize as the one he used when Harry said something that sounded like Lily. "Most people would be," he said. "Walking into a chamber of 52 senior wizards and witches to testify about, they're just people," Harry said. "Some of them have made good decisions. Some of them haven't. The ones who haven't are the ones who let Dumbledore seal records and keep a man in Azkaban without trial for 10 years. They don't get to be intimidating." He looked at Sirius. "I'm not angry at them. I just need them to do their jobs properly." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "How did you?" He stopped. "What?" "Nothing. Just," he shook his head. "When James and I were your age we'd have been terrified. And delighted about being terrified, because it would have made the whole thing more exciting." He paused. "You're not excited." "I'll be excited when it's done," Harry said. "Right now it's just the thing that needs to happen." Tuesday morning arrived with the particular quality of significant days, not different in its weather or its light or any physical property, but carrying a weight that was purely about what was going to happen in it. They were at the ministry by 8. The Wisingamot chamber was in the lower levels, reached by lift and then by a long corridor of black stone that was significantly more austere than the polished gold of the upper ministry. It was a deliberate architectural choice. The building made itself more serious as you descended, as if reminding everyone who moved through it that the deeper you went the more weight the proceedings carried. Bones met them outside the chamber doors with her 2 unspeakables and a face that was entirely focused, no different from any other time Harry had seen her, which he was beginning to understand was simply how she operated. She didn't perform gravity. She just had it. "Good morning," she said. "Here's where we are. The chamber opens at 9. The formal charges will be read at 9:15. Dumbledore and his advocate will have until 10 to enter their formal response. From 10 onward, we present. I expect we'll run until 3, possibly 4. She looked at Harry. "Your testimony is scheduled for early afternoon. I want you in there from the opening, but you won't be called until after we've established the technical and documentary record." "Understood," Harry said. "Sirius, your formal status adjustment is being handled concurrently with today's proceedings. Croker is managing that thread." She looked at him. "You should know that Peter Pettigrew has been located." The corridor went very quiet. Sirius went entirely still. It was a different quality of still than his usual, the kind that happens when every system simultaneously receives information it wasn't ready for and diverts all resources to processing it. Pettigrew, he said. His voice was completely flat. Where? He's been living as a rat in the Weasley family home, Bones said. She looked at Ron when she said it, briefly and with something that was close to gentleness. He was retrieved yesterday evening. He is currently in ministry custody. He has been veritaserumed. A pause. His testimony fully exonerates you. Ron was looking at a point on the wall across from him with the expression of someone recalibrating something fundamental. Scabbers, he said. Mostly to himself. He was Scabbers. For 12 years we had, he stopped. Harry reached across and gripped his shoulder briefly. Ron didn't look at him but his jaw worked and he nodded once. He'll be charged separately, Bones said. Today's session focuses on Dumbledore and the program. Pettigrew's hearing is Thursday. She looked at Sirius. I wanted you to know before you went in. Sirius breathed out. Something in his posture changed, not dramatically but fundamentally, the way a load-bearing structure changes when you remove a weight that's been pressing on it for a decade. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. We still have a full day. She looked at Harry. Ready? Yes, Harry said. She pushed open the chamber doors. The Wizengamot chamber was older than anything else in the ministry. It predated the building around it, had been in this space, in various forms, for 4 centuries. The walls were dark stone hung with purple banners carrying the Wizengamot scales N1 crest, and the seating rose in steep tiers around a central floor, and every seat was occupied. 52 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes, and above them the elevated bench of the chair and 2 assessors. Harry walked in and found a seat in the witness section to the left of the central floor. He sat. He looked around the chamber, at the tiered faces, the plum robes, the specific quality of institutional gravity that a room produces when its furniture is old enough to have absorbed centuries of important decisions. Across the central floor, Dumbledore sat at the respondents' table with Lucius Malfoy beside him. Dumbledore looked, as he always looked, simultaneously enormous and composed. His robes today were deep blue. He had not brought his wand. Bones's protocols required it to be held by ministry security during proceedings. Without it, he was still one of the most powerful men in the room. Everyone knew this. No one said it. It was simply part of the architecture of the space. He looked at Harry when Harry sat down. Harry met his gaze, held it for a moment, nodded once, a small, neutral acknowledgement, and then looked at Bones, who was arranging documents at the prosecution table with the efficiency of someone who has been in this room many times and has no interest in its atmospherics. The chair called the session to order at 9:03. The charges were read at 9:17. The reading took 12 minutes. Harry had read the charges in document form. Hearing them read aloud in the formal cadence of Wizengamot procedure, in a room full of 52 people, was different. It was the difference between reading about weather and standing in it. Each count had a name and a date and a specific characterization, each memory charm enumerated, each limiter catalogued, each act of the convergence program described in the clipped, precise language of formal accusation. 12 minutes of everything that had been done to him and his family and 11 other families, laid out in public, on record, undeniable. When the reading finished, the chamber was very quiet. Malfoy entered the formal response with the composed skill of someone who has spent his entire career in rooms like this and knows exactly how to perform certainty. He was concise, which Harry noted. He'd expected Malfoy to be expansive, to use the time to build something elaborate. Instead he made 3 points cleanly and sat down. The 3 points were, the intent was protective. The execution was exceptional in its historical context. The outcome, the survival of the wizarding world from Voldemort's first reign, justified the means employed. It was a good argument. It was an honest argument, in the sense that it was what Dumbledore genuinely believed and Malfoy was genuinely making the best case available. Harry sat in the witness section and listened to it and gave it the respect of acknowledging that it was well made. Then he thought about what Hermione had said about the most recent memory charm being applied after the war ended, and felt the argument's structural weakness with the clarity of someone who has thought about nothing else for 2 weeks. Bones began at 10. She had 6 documents and 4 witnesses scheduled before Harry, and she moved through them with the focused momentum of someone who has been building toward this moment for years. Not just for this case, Harry had the sense, watching her work, that Amelia Bones had been waiting for the opportunity to address what she'd known or suspected about the wizarding world's institutional failures for a very long time, and this case had given her a vehicle for it that she was not going to waste. The first witness was Aluasian, who presented her technical findings with the same settled authority she brought to everything. The limiters, the core suppression, the developmental impact of 9 years of artificially constrained magical growth. She was specific and quantified and unmoved by Malfoy's cross-examination, which was competent but couldn't find purchase against someone who had the numbers and knew what they meant. The second witness was Aldrich, presenting the genealogical findings. She was crisper than Aluasian and slightly more combative, not aggressively, but with the particular energy of someone who has spent 30 years protecting records that someone powerful kept trying to seal, and has been waiting for the opportunity to unseal them in a room that matters. The third and fourth witnesses were ministry legal specialists establishing the statutory frameworks that had been violated. This was the procedural foundation work, necessary and dense, and Harry used the time to review his own notes and observe the chamber. He watched the faces of the Wisengamot members as the testimony accumulated. He watched some of them shift. He watched some of them remain very still in the way that people remain still when what they're hearing is confirming something they'd already suspected and not known what to do with. He watched 3 of them, an older witch in the far tier, a short wizard 2 seats down from her, a man whose face he recognized as connected to Cornelius Fudge though he couldn't remember the name, who were not shifting or going still but were writing notes with the speed and focus of people managing a strategic situation rather than receiving evidence. He filed that. He'd give it to Bones in the break. The fifth witness was Croker, who presented the sediment fragment analysis. The fragments. The name Sirius in the emotional sediment around the third charm. The maternal voice. The suppressed bloodline knowledge. Croker presented all of it with the dry, precise neutrality he brought to everything, and the neutrality made it hit harder than any emotive delivery could have. The removal of a dead woman's voice from her infant son's memory, presented with the flat accuracy of scientific fact, landed with a weight that the chamber felt. Harry could see it in the faces. Not pity, he didn't want pity, and Bones had been careful not to construct pity. Something more like reckoning. The sixth witness was Sirius. He stood at the witness podium in borrowed robes that didn't quite fit. McGonagall had arranged something appropriate, but appropriate for Sirius Black of 10 years ago and Sirius Black today were not the same measurements, and he answered Bones's questions with the directness of someone who has been storing things to say for a very long time and has finally found the room for it. He described the weeks after Godric's Hollow. The fragment of time that the sediment had already partially confirmed, the days of holding Harry and speaking to him about his parents, of explaining in the simple, direct language of a 22-year-old trying to translate grief into something a 14-month-old could hold. He described what he'd intended. The life he'd planned. The refusal he'd expected to put up against any attempt to place Harry with Muggles. Was your opinion about Harry's placement sought at any point? Bones asked. No, Sirius said. Were you consulted about the memory charm program? No. Were you aware, when you were taken to Azkaban, that Harry Potter's memories of you were being erased? No, Sirius said. His voice was steady. The steadiness cost him something. Harry could see what it cost, from the witness section, but he maintained it. I spent 10 years in Azkaban thinking he at least had the memories. That he knew. A pause. He had nothing. Malfoy's cross-examination was brief. He had nothing to challenge in the substance of what Sirius had said, the facts were what the facts were. He made one question count. Mr. Black, you were taken to Azkaban based on evidence of that night. Are you claiming that evidence was fabricated? Yes, Sirius said. That's exactly what I'm claiming. And Pettigrew's Veritaserum testimony from yesterday proves it. He looked at Malfoy with the grey eyes that had spent 10 years going very hard and then very slowly coming back. I imagine you've seen that testimony. Malfoy sat down. They broke at 1 o'clock. Harry found Bones in the corridor outside and told her about the 3 Wisengamot members and their focused note-taking. She listened with the complete attention she brought to information, thanked him with the brevity she brought to everything, and said, "Yes. I've been watching them. All 3 have existing connections to the previous administration's inner circle. Their votes are going to be our margin." She looked at him. "Which is why your testimony matters. Because the technical record is complete and they're going to vote on the politics," Harry said. "Yes," Bones said. "We have the evidence. I need the chamber to feel the evidence. Which is different and which I am asking you to help with." She looked at him steadily. "Tell them what it was. Not what the documents say it was. What it actually was. To you." "I will," Harry said. He ate lunch with Sirius and Ron and Hermione in a ministry anteroom that someone had arranged with sandwiches and tea. Hermione had her notes open and was cross-referencing something with the focused energy she used when she was doing 8 things simultaneously. Ron was eating with the thorough dedication of someone who has decided that maintaining blood sugar is a valid contribution to the afternoon's events. Sirius drank his tea and looked at Harry. "You're very calm," he said. "I told you," Harry said. "It's not frightening. You're about to testify in front of the full Wisengamot about my own life," Harry said. "No one knows my own life better than I do." He took a sandwich. "I'll be fine." "I know you will," Sirius said. He looked at his tea. "I spent 10 years thinking about you. About what I should have done. About what I'd do differently. And now you're here and he looked up, "you're all right. You're actually, genuinely all right. And I don't quite know what to do with that." Harry looked at him. "You could enjoy it," he said simply. Sirius blinked. "You spent 10 years in Azkaban," Harry said. "The fact that I'm all right could just be good. You don't have to make it complicated." He ate his sandwich. "Let it just be good." Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he did something Harry had only seen fragments of across 2 weeks, he smiled properly. Not the almost laugh, not the cracking open thing. An actual smile, full and unguarded, with the specific warmth of someone who has just been given permission to feel something without condition. "Right," he said. "Okay. It's good." "Good," Harry said. He was called at 2:45. He walked to the podium in the center of the chamber floor with the specific gait he'd had all week, direct, unhurried, not performing anything. The 52 faces in the tiered seats above him ranged from attentive to guarded to carefully neutral. The chair was a small woman in her 70s with the face of someone who has been conducting complex proceedings for 30 years and has developed comprehensive patience as a result. "Mr. Potter," she said. "You may give your testimony in whatever manner you choose. Please speak clearly for the record." "Yes," Harry said. He looked up at the chamber, at the tiers of faces, the banners, the ceiling. Then he looked at the chair directly. "Can I begin with a question?" A pause. "This is unusual, I know. I'll only ask one." He looked at the 3 members Bones had flagged. They were watching him with various calibrations of careful attention. Then he looked back at the chair. How many of the people in this chamber were aware, before last week's Oversight Committee session, that Sirius Black had never had a trial? The silence that followed was, itself, a kind of answer. 3 hands rose, slowly. Including Bones, at her table. Including McGonagall, in the witness gallery. Harry nodded. 14 people, he said, counting. Out of 52. The other 38, and I'm including myself in this, because I'm 11 and reasonably excused from knowing ministry procedure, the other 38 didn't know. Which means for 10 years, a man was in Azkaban without a conviction and most of the body responsible for ensuring justice in the wizarding world didn't know. He looked at the chamber. I'm starting there because I want to be clear that what I'm going to talk about is not just about what was done to me. It's about what happens when people trust too completely that things are being managed correctly. And don't check. He paused. No one spoke. My name is Harry Potter. I'm 11 years old. Since I was 14 months old, the most powerful wizard of this generation has been reaching into my head every few months and adjusting what I know about my own life. I have no real memories of my mother's face. I have no memories of my father's voice. I have no memories of the godfather who held me for weeks after my parents died and told me who they were every single day. Those things were taken from me before I was old enough to understand that they were being taken. He looked at the chamber. At the faces. At the 3 flagged members who were watching him with careful attention. I'm not going to tell you it was the worst thing that's ever happened to someone, he said. It wasn't. Voldemort killed my parents when I was 15 months old. That's worse. But the memory charms are different in a specific way that matters legally and morally. Voldemort did what he did out of conviction. He believed that what he was doing was right according to his own framework, which was a monstrous framework, but it was his. What Dumbledore did, he did while calling himself my protector. While presenting himself to the world as the man who ensured my safety. He managed me. He let the word sit. That's the right word. Managed. The way you manage a resource. The way you manage a program. He looked at Dumbledore at the respondents' table. The old man was looking back at him with the same expression he'd had in the hospital wing 10 days ago, the genuine pain, the exhausted complexity of a man confronting the full weight of his own choices. I don't think Dumbledore is evil, Harry said, still looking at him. I think he's something more difficult than that. I think he's a genuinely brilliant man who decided decades ago that the scope of his vision was large enough to justify making decisions about other people's lives without their knowledge. I think he believes that's true. I think he'll believe it until he dies. He looked back at the chamber. That's the argument you're going to hear from his advocate. That the vision justifies the means. That the outcome, the fact that I'm standing here, that Voldemort is gone, validates 52 years of deciding what other people get to know about themselves. He gripped the podium edge lightly. I was 11 days away from Hogwarts when the most recent memory charm was applied. Voldemort had been gone for 14 months. The war was over. There was no emergency, no necessity, no active threat. The charm was applied because someone wanted to continue managing an asset that was about to become independent enough to ask questions. He looked at the chair. That's not protection. That's control. And there is no version of that, no historical context, no good intention, no prophecy, that makes it acceptable to do to a child. He stepped back from the podium. I'd like Sirius Black formally cleared before the end of today's session, he said. Not Thursday. Today. He's been waiting 10 years. The evidence is there. I'd like it done. The chair looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Bones. Bones said, the evidence is sufficient for immediate formal exoneration. The motion is ready to be called. The chair looked at the chamber. We'll hear the exoneration motion first, she said. Before we recess for deliberation. The exoneration motion passed in 6 minutes. 47 in favor. 3 abstentions, the same 3 that Bones had flagged. 2 against, whose names Harry memorized for later reference because that was, he had decided, useful information. When the result was announced, Sirius was in the witness gallery and he made no sound at all. He was perfectly still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he put his face in his hands and Harry, from across the chamber floor, watched his godfather's shoulders shake with the specific, involuntary shaking of someone who has released something they have been holding for 10 years. McGonagall, sitting beside him, put her hand on his back without comment. She left it there. Harry turned back to face the front of the chamber and pressed his lips together once and breathed out through his nose and did not look at Sirius again until he'd got himself entirely steady, which took perhaps 30 seconds. Then he looked. Sirius had his face out of his hands. He was looking at Harry. His eyes were red and his face was entirely undone and he looked like a man who has just been given back a decade, which was exactly what he was, and he looked at Harry with an expression that had no words appropriate to it. Harry gave him a small nod. The same kind he'd given Dumbledore at the start of the session, small, direct, acknowledging. But different in every way that mattered. Sirius nodded back. The deliberation ran 2 hours. Harry sat in the antechamber with his friends and his godfather and waited with the patience he'd been practicing all week, which was the patience of someone who has done everything available and now simply has to let the process complete. Ron was teaching Hermione exploding snap, which she was resisting on principle while clearly finding it interesting. Sirius was sitting in a chair with his eyes half closed in a specific way that meant he was thinking rather than resting. Harry was reading, because there was always something worth reading and because it settled him. He was halfway through Croker's paper on memory charm residue architecture, which he'd asked Croker for and Croker had provided with the air of someone who doesn't usually give unspeakable research papers to 11-year-olds and has decided to make an exception, when the door opened and Bones came in. Her face told him before she said anything. It told him the way good news looks on a face that doesn't perform, not widely, not demonstratively, but in the specific way that rigor allows itself to be satisfied. Guilty on 41 of the 67 memory charm charges, she said. Guilty on all 12 limiter applications. Guilty on the systemic manipulation count, that one was unanimous. She looked at Harry. Not guilty on 6 counts where Dumbledore's advocate successfully argued insufficient specific evidence. The remaining 20 counts are to be revisited at a follow-up session in August. The convergence program? Harry asked. A separate charge is being filed next month, she said. The scope is too large for today's session, they want a dedicated hearing for the full program investigation. All 12 families. She paused. But the framework is established. The legal recognition that it happened, that it was systematic, that it constitutes a program rather than individual acts, that's on record. Today. Dumbledore's position? McGonagall asked. She'd come in from the chamber and was standing by the door with her arms at her sides, which was the posture she used when she was holding herself very carefully together. He retains his Order of Merlin. He is formally censured by the Wisengamot, the first time in 40 years that's happened to a sitting chief warlock. He is suspended from the chief wardenship pending the August session. And, Bones looked at McGonagall, the Board of Governors has been notified and will convene regarding the Hogwarts headmastership. That's not a ministry decision. That's the board's. McGonagall nodded once. Her face was entirely controlled and told nothing and everything simultaneously. The sentencing for today's guilty counts is 3 months from now, Bones continued. His advocate will make mitigation arguments. We'll present the counter. She looked at Harry. It will continue to be a process. I know, Harry said. Processes are fine. He set down Croker's paper. You built this correctly. Whatever happens in August and whatever happens at sentencing, today established the thing that needed to be established. Yes, Bones said. It did. She looked at him steadily. You were effective in there. So were you, Harry said. You did the work. I just told the truth. Sometimes, she said, telling the truth in the right room at the right moment is the work. She gathered her documents. I'll be in touch regarding August's session. Enjoy the rest of your year, Mr. Potter. She walked out with the brisk, forward efficiency that was simply her natural mode of movement, and the door closed behind her, and the antechamber held the 5 of them in a silence that was entirely different from the silences of the past 2 weeks. Ron said, so we won. We made a start, Harry said. A start that took 11 hours and aged me approximately 40 years, Ron said. I'm going to need dinner. An enormous one. I'm going to need basically all of whatever's available for dinner. Hermione looked at her notes. The censure precedent established today will apply to the August proceedings, she said. Which means the convergence program hearing begins from a position of, Hermione, Ron said. Yes. Dinner first. She looked at her notes. Then at Ron. Then she put her notes away. All right, she said. Dinner first. Sirius was standing by the window of the antechamber. He'd been quiet through the exchange with Bones and was still quiet now, but differently quiet than Azkaban quiet. He was looking out at whatever the Ministry's basement-level antechambers looked out at, which turned out to be a courtyard with a single tree in it, small and stubborn and green in the June light. Sirius, Harry said. Yeah. His voice was slightly rough. Are you hungry? A pause. I could eat, Sirius said. Then let's go, Harry said. He picked up his bag. He waited while everyone gathered themselves, the documents and the folders and the notes, all the apparatus of the day being packed away. He waited while McGonagall straightened her robes and Hermione found her second favorite quill under the chair where it had rolled, and Ron counted the sandwiches left on the plate and determined there were 2 and ate them both, and Sirius turned from the window with the expression of a man who is beginning, very carefully, to believe in what's in front of him. Then Harry pushed open the antechamber door and led them out into the Ministry corridor, and the day was still going on around them, the lifts moving, the memos flying, the atrium full of people getting on with the ordinary business of the wizarding world, and all of it was the same as it had been that morning and nothing about it was the same at all,